We're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry we're a little bit late. Make sure the volume's okay. I don't echo you out. I'll give them a quick second. Make sure my phone's off. You good? Okay. Well, good morning, and thank you for being here this morning on the campus of Georgia Tech. As a Georgia Tech alum, it's always a great day to be here. It's been almost 20 years. I was telling Senator Albers, this place has changed, but honored to be in a beautiful facility to talk about an important topic to the state of Georgia, cybersecurity. We have a couple of senators who are in traffic. They should be here over the next few minutes, but I don't want to keep our guests waiting in the audience and those online. I do want to recognize a few people, some folks that helped us bring us together today for this topic, and then some of our state agency partners. I know the Office of Governor Brian Kemp is watching online, and they've been very collaborative in this process. I know Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan has somebody from his office here today. I do want to recognize the Department of Public Safety, the Adjutant General's office with the Georgia National Guard, his leadership and the staff. I believe that's going to be here today. The Director Ajima, Director Stallings, thank you for being here today. I know the Georgia Technology Authority, Sean Zia, thank you for being here today with your team. I know we're going to be hearing from your team a little bit later on. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Nellie, thank you for being here, and your team, and the work that you're doing, and also the new director, Michael Register. I also want to recognize our Senate press office for putting everything together today and making this happen. We are live streaming, so everything you say can and will be used against you. I feel like I can say that since there's current and former law enforcement people here in this room. Our Senate Budget Office, I want to thank them for being here today because of the discussion and the impacts that it does have on our state budget potentially, all the work by our Senate Research Office. I do want to recognize one of our federal partners who is invited. I don't know if they've shown up yet, is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Thank them for being here. And then just briefly, being at Georgia Tech, I do want to thank President Angel Cabrera for allowing us to have this meeting here. Morgan McCombs, where are you at? I'm going to embarrass you. Thank you for all your work, making this happen, working with the agenda, putting up with my nonsense to get us here today. And so I just want to recognize you, Abigail, Bert, and the entire Georgia Tech team for having us here. My assistant, Anna Horvath, thank you for being here, doing everything that you've done to bring us here. And then I also want to recognize Beth and Skeet Spillane, and you're going to hear from Skeet here in a minute for talking about this idea about a cyber force. With that, I'm going to let my Senate colleague, Senator Albers, introduce himself, and then we'll let the other senators, when they arrive, introduce themselves.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, want to heap a bunch of praise onto Senator Anna Vitarte for putting the study committee forward and chairing it. This is such an important topic, one that we need to have the focus, leadership, and budget for. I'm a technology and cybersecurity person by trade, so we're talking my language. I'm excited to hear from you and know that the work we're going to do is going to be impactful to both our businesses and families throughout our state of Georgia. And I'm honored to represent the 56th District, which is North Fulton, Cobb County, as well as Cherokee County.
Thank you, Senator Albers. And I do want to recognize, I saw a Director Register walk in the back room. Thank you, sir, for being here today. Thank you for your service.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
The purpose of this committee is to obviously talk about cybersecurity, but the interest I have in it, and I know many of you may have in it, and along with my Senate colleagues, is to find ways to make state government more secure. As we talk about coordinated efforts in terms of not just being on defense, but also being reactionary, proactive, and protecting our citizens' assets and protecting the Georgia economy and protecting our citizens first and foremost. The biggest two things I would like to see happen as we have this series of meetings, this will be the first of potentially three we will have on this topic, is to find ways that we have a healthy dialogue, a healthy discussion between the state and the private sector, and creating more relationships and how we share resources, how we communicate, as appropriate, because I know some information is sensitive, and I do want to be sensitive to that. As the topic we're having today is a security conversation. As appropriate, how we share information as a state between the state and private sector, but also leveraging private sector resources as we think about how do we grow our apparatus in the sense of becoming more secure and not always having to rely on the federal government at times when I think there's maybe some nimble things that we can do as a state to protect our assets, protect our agencies, but also protect the citizens' information here in Georgia. As we go through the conversation today, our purpose was to be intentional, to have a variety and a very diverse background of leaders and backgrounds here for the discussion today. So you will hear from chief security officers from the private sector, you will hear from academia, you will hear from state government, you will hear from law enforcement. And as we go forward in terms of defining what is the opportunity and what are the solutions in terms of addressing cybersecurity and making us more secure in Georgia, it's our belief that we need to leverage every asset that we have. This cannot be territorial. This cannot be Republican versus Democrat. I truly hope, as I've told the committee and we've spoken amongst ourselves, that this truly be a bipartisan effort, working collaboratively with the Senate, with the House, with the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, but also with all of our agencies here, and this not become a territorial discussion. Because having many years ago, I guess when I was in college on this campus, having worked for a state agency, I know that sometimes can happen, but I think in the cybersecurity discussion, there really is no place for that. So hopefully we'll have a very positive conversation and kind of keep that tone as this committee meets over the next several weeks. So I would want to take a quick moment and let our majority leader introduce himself, Senator Dugan.
Sorry I'm late. My stuff got hacked this morning. No, traffic was terrible on the way in, but appreciate this. Everybody understands the importance that cybersecurity has across the entire state. We have a dilemma of we have to have a governmental web program that's easily accessible to all Georgians to meet their needs, yet secure enough that we can't have issues with it. So I appreciate what the chair is doing here. I feel like we've talked this a couple of times, so I'm excited to see what you're going to do to get it fixed this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin. The first panel is Changing Landscape in Cybersecurity, and I do want to introduce Skeet Spillane, who's the president of Pillar Technologies, with the partners, Chief Security Officers panel. Skeet Spillane has over 25 years of experience in information security and threat intelligence and analysis. He has worked for many of the largest Fortune 50 companies and significant experience in government, education, healthcare, and financial services. He brings a unique combination of business acumen, deep technology experience, and understanding of how current state of cybersecurity threatens private industry in Georgia. This experience is why he believes the Georgia Cyber Force is needed to ensure Georgia and can effectively respond to current and future cyber threats. I do want to take 10 seconds and recognize Skeet for his work over the last year, working with myself and educating, I know several of us, including me. I don't know everything, even though I did graduate from Georgia Tech. Yes, no doubt. How important this is, and I think we have to be innovative and outside the box, and we talk about how we close gaps and we build relationships with the private sector. So Skeet, thank you for being here today, and let you introduce our guests.
Great, thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here. I'm very excited to be participating in what I think is a monumental effort. As you said, we have traditionally looked to the federal government to help us in these situations, but ground root efforts and localized response is so critical to cybersecurity. We need to be able to respond quickly, and any delays in that can further the impacts that we see as a result of these attacks. And we all see these attacks are occurring every day in the headlines, and we know how detrimental they can be to government agencies, but the private sector as well, and that carries over quickly into the economy. As we've all seen in Georgia over the last couple of years, we've had a couple of incidents that greatly impacted the direct economy of Georgia because of the locality of the attack. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have our panelists, Curly Henry from Georgia Power and David Levine from RICO USA. I'm going to let you guys make a quick introduction of yourselves, and then we'll kind of dive into some questions.
Thank you, Skeet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senators. Curly Henry, Vice President and Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for Georgia Power. I, too, had the honor and pleasure of teaching at Georgia Tech for a couple of years before joining the military. 20-plus years in cybersecurity, post-military, Department of Defense, IBM, HP, and now have the esteemed pleasure of working for Georgia Power and serving the customers of the state.
Hi, good morning. I'm David Levine. I'm the Chief Security Officer for RICO USA. So I've got broad responsibility for not only cybersecurity, but physical security and trade compliance. I also lead RICO's global security team. I've been a CISO now a little over 10 years, but almost 30 years in technology. And apart from that, I also serve in the Georgia State Defense Force as an officer. So thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, guys. Want to dive right in. You know, obviously the private sector is seeing attacks on a frequent basis, and I wanted to kind of open the first question with, how have you seen in your organizations cyber affecting your business?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with that. So without a doubt, I mean, it's every day, it's all day long, right? So most companies today, as well as government, are attacked nonstop, 24/7. And it was once, somebody I know well once described it as an asymmetric battlefield, and I think that's a correct analogy. So, you know, the adversaries we're up against, you know, range from inexperienced to nation-state adversaries, and they have all the resources in the world. And the difference is they only have to get it right once in a while, where on our side of the equation, we've got to get it right 24/7, 365, because one single incident can lead to a major disruption in business. So certainly, you know, we see a wide range of issues, from minor cybersecurity incidents that you may triage and respond to quickly to, you know, much larger situations that require a lot more effort and time.
You know, one of the things I would add to that is the friction that causes. Right? So think about it from a basic criminal perspective. If you're in a place where crime goes up, you add a lock. Crime continues to go up, you add monitoring. Crime continues to go up, and you just keep adding more and more friction, right? That's what's happening in our businesses. As the cyber attacks increase, we've got more training for our employees. Well, they were here to do a job, and now they've got to take cyber training. Now they're doing additional cyber phishing test. Now we're putting on more locks for them to be able to access the network. Now we're putting on more locks for our customers to engage with our business. So this cyber attack increase inevitably trickles down to every other part of our business and ultimately the economy. The other things that people see and or don't see, depending on from their perspective, is the things that I just referenced as friction also relate to increase in cost. If you look at the cyber insurance market, they've been hammered over the last couple of years because of the number of attacks and the number of people and companies that have been looking for payouts, right? The increase in payouts means increase in premiums, even if you haven't had an attack. And those increase in premiums for all businesses inevitably find their way to increased costs.
Great. So we know that there's a variety of different threat actors. You started kind of talking about the nation states, but there's also hacktivists, there's the criminal enterprises. What are the most prevalent attack methods you're seeing coming at your business on these day-to-day type of incidents that you're trying to manage?
Yeah, and as as my colleague noted, we both have many, many years in this space, in this business. So when we speak about these threats, we're not necessarily just speaking from what our company has seen. We're speaking broadly across what all companies, as well as state and local governments and healthcare, are seeing. I'll touch on two or three of them. Ransomware, and ransomware gets a lot of pub these days. Ransomware has morphed, though, right? The initial ransomware was about locking up a system. You pay, and you get it back. You don't pay, you don't get your data back. Well, once people stop paying, ransomware morphed to, we're going to steal the data, and then we're going to lock it. You don't pay, we're going to release the data into the public, right? So it's this morphing attack. And as cyber defenders, as we figure out more and better ways to both prevent ransomware attacks from locking our system and protecting that data, the threat actors are just going to find different ways to take advantage of that. Phishing continues to be one of the primary vectors that threat actors are trying to take advantage. Their ability to send an email to make it look real, either being broad or very specific to one of you senators. Those things seem to know no bounds. Both of us, 25 years, there isn't a fish that can't be crafted to fool the best of us, right? Supply chain attacks. So a couple of years ago, the SolarWinds attack got a lot of press because it impacted a lot of business. Well, if you think about it, if we continue to put more and more locks on our front doors, what are some of the doors that we leave unlocked? I always like to joke, which doors do we let our friends and family come in? Right? That's the back door, right? The side door. Well, that's what supply chain represents because they're friendly to us. We expect that they've got the right security. The adversaries are not taking advantage of that and attacking those supply chains to be able to more easily get into our companies.
Yeah, I think so. Those are great points. Obviously, echo a lot of what he just said. Ransomware, you can't get around it. Double extortion, as he mentioned, which for any company can be truly devastating. If you're a really small company with a significant ransomware attack, it can put you out of business. Thankfully, I'm going to reference one that I'm aware of. It wasn't us, thankfully, but it was somebody that we were well aware of. And, it was a double extortion ransomware attack. So they ransomed them for their data. They ransomed them to get the encryption keys. But to take it a step further, in the data they stole their insurance policy. So they knew exactly how much to ransom them for and wouldn't negotiate. And they also destroyed their backups on the way out the door. That left that company with absolutely no choice but to pay the ransom because it was their only way to possibly get back. The other thing to bear in mind with ransomware, even if you do pay, there's never a guarantee that it's going to work. And in fact, in this case, the decryption keys, because of the way it was encrypted, it didn't work. The only reason that business is still around today is they found a 3-year-old backup in a corner, literally, that had just enough data to keep their doors open. So those types of attacks can be devastating. Phishing, absolutely, in all forms, and you can get phishing through traditional email, through text, through voice. The other thing that I would put out there, I think that we see a lot of today, is what we call business executive compromise type attacks, where their emails, where the email itself is not loaded with malware or ransomware or anything like that, but it's an attempt to trick or fool, typically finance or somebody in authority, to redirect funds, redirect invoice payments, wire transfers, what have you. And they can be devastating as well. We've seen some companies get hit with over $1 million, hundreds of thousands of dollars by successfully, in essence, tricking the company into paying somebody other than who they thought they were paying. So we see all of these threats on a daily basis. And I love what he said, because I've said it too. And the thing to always bear in mind is even if you have the most educated security person, if you catch them on the wrong day with the right email, at the right time, they're going to click on it. And so that's the challenge. And so you've got to always be trying to train the organization, put the right defenses in place without causing friction, because that's the thing. At the end of the day, we're here to enable the business. We're not here to disrupt the business. We're not here to trip the business up, or in your case, government. It's to try and build those walls, educate the employees, put solutions in, and do it in as much as humanly possible without it being disruptive and apparent to your users.
Absolutely. And, we see all the time, especially on the phishing and the ransomware and the business email compromise, they're so good at targeting the times when people are distracted and busy. They are crafty at what they do, and they know when people are going to be distracted. Holidays, ends of month, ends of week, they try to target purposely. So that's a constant challenge. So obviously being on the hot seat as a CISO, you see what's coming at your organization. But how have you seen cyber attacks affect the broader Georgia community, the economy? What have you seen from your perspective in the broader state of Georgia, how cyber attacks have affected the economy?
Yeah, I mean, again, any major cyber attack has the ability to substantially disrupt a business. And even if you successfully thwart or respond to an attack, you got to remember that that's taking time and resources and energy and people away from what they're doing on a daily basis. And whether you have systems down for periods of time, again, for businesses large and small, I mean, any amount of downtime, depending on your operation, can equate to real dollars lost, and every dollar lost, rolls into the economy. So, again, not to keep picking on ransomware, but if you get a situation where you have, a significant amount of your environment that gets encrypted, you're looking at substantial downtime typically to respond and bring those environments back up. And again, it's going to have a real and tangible, benefit. If you were to look at transportation or power or any of the critical infrastructure, now you're potentially hospitals. You're talking life safety issues. So literally, and not trying to be dramatic, but you can clearly look at life and death situations. And you've seen issues in other parts of the country and globally with pretty devastating attacks to hospitals and other critical infrastructure.
To pull on the thread a little bit more from a ransomware perspective and as how it impacts Georgia economy, we're here representing Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and we get the press, right? So cyber attack hits us, it makes the news. One of the things that the adversaries have done from a shift perspective is that they've realized, right, and it all points to motivation. Let me take a step back. Why is an attack occurring, right? So some attacks are occurring from a hacktivist perspective. We want to make a point, no more, no less. If we can take something down, then we've made our point. Some of them are nation states, essentially, countries, governments. Well, that's almost government on government war being fought in the cyberspace. Right? But a lot of it today is money motivated. Right? And the more that it's money motivated, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, those that were getting hit were banks because they were the ones who had the money. Right? And then it shifted to retail because you could steal the credit cards from the retailers and then sell them on the dark market. And now with things like ransomware, everybody's in play, right? Because if I can hit a state or local government, if I can hit a school and shut down an education system, like how much is that school willing to pay to get their students back up and running in days instead of months, right? And so the the quote unquote battlefield for who's in play to potentially be attacked is all of us. And so that's why you see more. He noted hospitals. That's why you see more healthcare being hit. Just think about all of the healthcare that we have here, both hospitals and insurers in our state, state and local government, education, transportation. Any of those businesses being impacted by just being taken down and or being impacted from a financial perspective would have devastating impacts. For one of the things that starts to make this thing real, and it's unfortunate, is when it happens close to home. And unfortunately, it's happened close to home for us here, one too many. The most recent being Colonial Pipeline, but a few years prior to that was the city of Atlanta ransomware attack. So, we don't have to wonder what the impacts were. We can go back and study and look at direct impacts of what that looked like for our state and for our citizens.
And we know those impacts were substantial especially on the Colonial Pipeline. We saw it for days on end, where we were trying to recover from the downtime. So they absolutely have that. David, did you have something else to add?
Well, one thing I was just going to make a point, it's just a little tangent slightly, but just to emphasize the adversary today, and he's money motivated for sure. They view it as a business. And just some of you are probably aware, but these ransomware folks, you can go out on the dark web and you can buy a toolkit to launch ransomware yourself for very little money. And by the way, it comes with a help desk, a really good help desk. Like, they staff it 24/7. They're there to help that person succeed. And, one of the things that you see a lot too is they work together. The adversaries definitely work together. Yeah, they have their own motivation. Yes, they have their own requirements and goals. But at the end of the day, that community works together and they share information, they sell information, and they help each other out. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and one quick point. While two entities were named, I just called out two entities because they were close to home. That's not to cast aspersion on them at all. As David noted, any of us can be one click away in our environment from having these devastating impacts.
Yeah, and I don't see any end to this. It's not like we can go fix something quickly and turn it off and cyber attacks stop. So with the kind of the freight train still coming at us from a cyber perspective, how do you prepare for the future attacks? How do you prepare for what may be coming down the road for your organizations as an economy as well?
Yeah. So a few things there. We've been very diligent about establishing public-private partnerships because we know that we can't win alone. David just said the adversaries are working together. If we work in silos, we will absolutely lose. We cannot win alone. So on the federal level, we've got relationships with Department of Energy, which is the space that it come from, but obviously Department of Defense, DHS, and I can list the litany of three-letter agencies, ultimately getting into things that allow us to get intelligence, right? Because it's that intelligence that's those government agencies are able to see broadly, that the sooner we can get that information, the sooner that we can react, be proactive in putting defenses in place, or reactive to see if something is already in our environment. The other thing is preparing for the future. And I know that we'll hit on this a couple of times, but training and workforce, right? So I have the privilege of being on the Industrial Advisory Board here for Georgia Tech's new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy to ensure that we're training the next generation with the right skills to come right into the market to be able to aid and assist. Our company is working with women in technology who have a single mothers program for a cybersecurity certificate. Like, where else can we get people in the workforce in the right training to be able to more quickly acclimate, assimilate, and be able to help with this staffing issue. And then Georgia Power partnered with Apple on creating the Propel Center, which is aiding HBCUs in making sure that those schools are also having the right skill sets, experience, education, so that talent coming out is able to immediately contribute to the workforce.
Yeah, so trying to stay in front of what's coming down the pipe is not always an easy task, but certainly this job is bigger than any one person. No single person, no single security team can solve this whole problem. So information sharing and partnering is really critical. Being able to rely on a variety of sources. So, staying on top of threat feeds, staying on top of research, staying on top of, what's happening in the media. I mean, you've got all these different resources of information. And so part of that is making sure that you're constantly staying on top of it. But, I will say, and certainly here in Atlanta, we have a great CISO community. Very tight knit. We have a lot of great resources here. And we spend a lot of time talking to each other. We spend a lot of time meeting with each other in a variety of formats to share that information. Because again, it's this job is bigger than any one person, and we don't all have all the answers. So being able to tap into a lot of different resources and figure out what everyone's doing and what's working for you, is huge and helpful. And so I think there's a great opportunity here to take those same concepts and expand it, within government here, because it's the same thing. I mean, being able to share information, being able to work together, and it's also about building relationships. It's not always just about sharing the information, but building those relationships and, learning who's really good at certain things and being able to rely on them, knowing who to go to, and knowing you've got a bunch of folks you can reach out to when something does happen, and not try and work an issue in a silo. And all of that is, a piece of this puzzle, ever-changing puzzle that we're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. We got about 5 more minutes, and then see if the committee has any questions.
Great, yeah, and I'm going to actually kind of bring this around to Georgia Cyberforce. We've talked a lot about the different topics, how it's impacting private industry, how we need better collaboration and cooperation, both in the private as well as in the public sectors. But what ideas do you have for a Georgia Cyberforce that would really help the state protect the economy, protect the organizations? What would you see as valuable coming out of a Cyberforce that could help drive it forward and make it highly effective?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a little repetitive of what I just said, but I think you take all of the things I just said that are currently happening a lot in the private community here in Georgia, and you expand that into the Cyberforce, and you include the government, and now you have an even bigger pool of people and information and different kinds of resources to pull on to help bring everything together, to help continue to fight the good fight that we're in every day, and share that information and build those relationships. And so I think really, that's one of the key benefits that you have here. And that's a two-way flow of information, right? It's not just about government providing information to the private sector. It's that same flow back. And we all have different specialties. We all have teams that we've got working for us that have, great experience, all kinds of backgrounds. So leverage all of that. Again, this job is bigger than any one person, any one team, or any one company. So the best way to help, combat what we're up against is to bring everybody together.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I also will be a little repetitive. I noted training and workforce, right? And that would provide lots of benefits. One of the challenges in our space is that we don't have enough people, right? And then when we get good people and get them trained up, I lose them to David, right? And so we need to do whatever we can to greatly expand this workforce. And in doing so, look at both traditional and non-traditional methods, right? This this is a space where you can come out and be highly specialized. You can go to a Georgia Tech or other four-year institutions coming out with a degree. There are some things from a cyber perspective where you can go and over a 3-6 month period get a cybersecurity certificate like this Single Mothers program and be able to start out in this space and really start building up a career in something that has tons of potential, which then aids the Georgia economy, right? And so mutual benefits that start to occur there. The other thing I would say is practice. Practice makes progress. Our ability to test and train on things that might happen before they ever occur is critically important for when they occur, being ready to respond in the right manner. So what that looks like when you start talking about public-private partnerships is tabletop exercises. That's when we bring someone in and you've got multiple entities. You got some public entities and some private entities coming together, and a scenario is put on the table, and everyone talks about how they respond to that scenario, right? And then you get lessons learned from that, and then people start building and enhancing their processes and policies and programs based on those things.
Excellent. Well, this has been very valuable in conversation today. Senator Anabatarte, I'm going to hand it back to you for any questions that the senators may have.
Yeah, thank you. I want to recognize my colleague from Cobb County, Senator Rett, for being here. Thank you, Michael, for attending. Good to see you. I have a couple questions, but I'm going to let Senator Albers go first. I think he has a question. This thing's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the great wisdom and information from the panel. Couldn't agree more with all the things you said. The one question I have that might take us a little outside, but I'm curious as to your input. We just passed the 21st anniversary of September 11, 2001. And the day that happened, the days after, we took our federal law enforcement and then ultimately our heroes in the military, and we flipped the script and we went after the bad actors. We went after the terrorists. Before, we were very much a reactive set of agencies as well as the way we deployed. I do not see that happening today in the cyber world, where we are doing that proactive, going after the folks that are doing that and taking them down proactively. It's more of, well, when it happens, we're going to help take the report. We might help to try and get the Bitcoin transfer money back. But it doesn't seem like we're actually taking that proactive approach. From my perspective, what is yours?
Yeah. Two things on that. I have the ability to from a computer perspective, right? I have the ability to make myself appear to the chairman as if it's coming from you. So attribution is tough. And you can only go after somebody if you know for a fact that they did it. And if the adversaries have figured out a way, if you're coming from China to go through Iran, well, are we supposed to be attacking Iran or China, right? And so until you can nail down attribution, it's very hard to respond. And the adversaries are getting very good at masking where they're coming from. So that's the first part. The second part of that is I was pleased to see our government go after those bad actors in the Colonial Pipeline situation, because I agree with you. Far too often, all you hear about is someone paid or how bad it was, but you're never hearing response and retribution. And until those adversaries know for a fact that if you come at us, be it public or private, that there's going to be an action, they'll continue to do it. The last thing I'll say on that is the challenge that can occur is that if the adversary isn't a nation state, if it's not a country, then who exactly are you going after? And it gets back into the attribution. in some instances, some of the ransomware attacks are occurring by essentially mafias, gangs, cyber gangs. But some of these gangs are hanging out in countries that we are that we don't have great relationships with. And so to respond might set off a cyber war when all we were trying to do was respond to a gang that happens to be in a country.
Yeah, I think he pretty much covered it, but yeah, I think it gets challenging real quick because does a private sector company go after some, even if you could figure out the attribution, right? Challenging for sure. But at what point do you risk starting a cyber war on behalf of the country, right? Let's say we could successfully go after North Korea or Iran, whatever threat gang, adversarial group it is, there's a tipping point in there somewhere. And I think, it's a great question, and I'd love to, be able to throw punch for punch. Believe me, it would be great if every time, something came in over the fence that we could go right back at them and go, well, you did that here's that times two. But unfortunately, again, you get companies, even a company the size of Ricoh, which is a large company, but you get companies, and if you're up against a nation state, you're up against an entire, nation's, cyber military force. And so, kind of back to that asymmetric battlefield. But great question.
Well, and I may have phrased that a little out of context. I was thinking more from the government, the three-letter agency level, of them proactively going after, right? So if a nation is harboring a terrorist or a gang, right, then they themselves have to be held accountable to that, whether it's actually going against that particular country or just literally going in and taking out the terrorists and the problem. So today, it doesn't seem like we are proactively, as a government and three-letter agency from a federal level, going after those guys. It seems like it's very reactive, and I'm curious, have you seen something different?
I don't know that I have great visibility to see. I mean, I certainly have gotten the impression we're doing some things, but again, I think it's whether it's kinetic warfare or cyber warfare, it's that same discussion. At what point do you visibly do something that you kick off, a large response that maybe is greater than you want? But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we have to figure it out, right? I mean, it's devastating to companies and could be to countries, and so I do think we got to figure it out.
And I'd like to add one thing on that is I would like to give credit where credit's due. FBI, DHS, and several of the federal agencies are coordinating with Interpol, Europol, and others, and they have had numerous takedowns over the last several months. Nigerian phishing and BEC campaigns have been taken offline. Numerous hackers in Ukraine and Central Europe have been taken down. They took down the Conti webpage and organization, although they popped back up. And to the point of attribution, I think there is the question of responsibility for that, and I think you hit it, that there really is that three-letter agency type of response for who does that retribution and how do they do that. But on attribution, to your point, I think that there's also the fact that attribution is diluted on purpose by the nation states. They engage private organizations and diversify those private organizations so that it's not directly attributable back to a nation state.
Senator Dugan had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have a question. I've got a couple of statements. These guys can't answer that question. That guy probably could, but he shouldn't answer that question. So I understand what you're saying there, but you can get HPTs over a period of time, just like you do with any large organization, any large nation state, any asymmetrical threat, which you mentioned a little while ago. With a little bit of time, a little bit of intel, you put all this together. So I kind of understand how that part could play out in the future. The second thing is one of my concerns about putting all the locks on the doors. After a while, you've got every means of entry or exit of your house locked, and you're just going to starve to death. Because that's the whole part of having this technology available, is that we can engage quicker, faster, and hopefully more secure. I mean, we're not leaving the bank vault open at night and the door open with all the cash in it. There are some security measures, but you can't live in a cube. So the challenges we have coming forward, that's why we're having this meeting, so y'all can tell us how to fix it. And then the last thing, we talked about the prosecuting. A lot of these, if they are within the country, it seems like they would be RICO statutes that would apply to that. And I have not heard of a RICO charge on one of these yet, so I'm sure it's coming. And I'm sure some lawyer somewhere has asked themselves that question. But those are just observations from listening, and I appreciate it. That was a great presentation. I appreciate it, but it spurred some thoughts in my mind. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Just as we wrap up, I know just to keep us going, I know at a subsequent meeting of this meeting, we will get into the workforce discussion. I know Morgan and I have talked about the importance of that piece of it. I think we will also invite somebody from Superintendent Wood's office to make sure that they're here, because the biggest piece of this is, you all are trying to sustain a workforce. And I know through the technical college system, we have a cyber program through our Career Academy in Paulding County, for example. But if we're going to fix this end of it, we need to grow folks up in it at the same time and make intentional investments, just like we need truck drivers, just like we need everything else. But you can go hire all the truck drivers, but if the supply chain isn't secure, it's going to blow up at the end of the day. And so we gotta be thinking about that as we move through this process. The other thing I just want to say, make this comment out loud, because I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, is that as we, the Senate, legislature, go through this process of having these discussions, I do want to be sensitive to, this is my opinion. I'm sure the other senators have their own opinions, but just the sensitivities around the government asking for sensitive information, or elected bodies asking for sensitive information, from Southern Company or different companies that, quite frankly, really have no place in this discussion as we talk about the security build out and apparatus of what we're doing to protect data and information. So I hope my colleagues throughout the legislature will be sensitive and mindful of that there is appropriate information and that there is also inappropriate information, being sensitive to trade secrets, security aspects, and those things. So I just want to say that out loud. But Ski, David, Curley, thank you for being here and sharing your background and information, and we'll transition now to the next panel with folks from Georgia Tech. So thank you.
Thank you.
And as we go along, we're just going to keep pushing through. If you need to get up, get some water, go take a bathroom break, whatever, just take your time and do that. The next panel, we're going to talk about understanding the impact of cybersecurity challenges, moderated by Dean Rahim Behad with the College of Engineering here at Georgia Tech. And I'll let the Dean introduce the folks with him today. Thank you, Dean.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wake up.
Morning.
I know this is a solemn discussion, but we still should be happy and enjoying that we're here. Thank you,
Nothing
Senator.
bad's happened while we were here, so it shouldn't be too solemn.
That's right. Thanks for inviting
right.
me and inviting us to have this discussion here at Georgia Tech. I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself, and then we'll just jump right in because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm Rahim Bia. I'm the Dean of Engineering here at Georgia Tech and also Southern Company Chair. I also have a company, so not only do I do research in this area, cybersecurity, and focus on workforce development, but we've also identified problems that were so significant that we said, we got to get out and play. And so the company does industrial cybersecurity work, and I'm not involved other than sort of board discussions. But that gives me a nice perspective. I'm able to look and see from an academic side what are things that are happening and we think will happen 5, 10, 15 years from now, but also look and see what's going on right now in terms of our critical infrastructure and ways to secure it. Darren, it's all yours.
Sure. Thanks, Dean Bia. Thank you to the senators and chairman. My name is Darren Hubbard. I'm the Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer here at Georgia Tech. And I have responsibility for the systems that run this fine institution, including student registration, finance, and also the cyber information security that protects all that data that we generate.
My name is Michael Bailey. I'm the new chair of the new School of Cybersecurity and Privacy here at Georgia Tech. I came here just 3 months ago from the University of Illinois, but I've had a career in industry working at places like British Petroleum and Accenture, and some startups, most notably Arbor Networks, which is the sort of premier vendor for defending against distributed denial of service attacks in the world.
All right, so I'll start with just a couple of statements, and then we'll dive right into questions. And one actually is to reiterate, Senator Anvatarte, what you started with, which is this problem is so significant that nothing can divide us as we attack it, period, right? And so we have seen that. We've seen cybersecurity evolve over the years, and it started out, the previous panel did a great job talking about these are script kiddies that were annoying. You did AOL dial-up back in the day, and I'm telling my age, and you had this malware that came and it filled up your hard drive. Oh, this is so annoying. And it's evolved all the way to now nation states. The other thing that is extremely important that the panelists mentioned before was it is asymmetric, and we should appreciate that. So we got dozens of windows in this room. We got to defend all of them, and the attacker needs one. That is extremely, extremely hard to do. I have graduate students right now that have found flaws in vendor equipment. Like, they just spent a week with this sort of equipment that's powering our critical infrastructure, right? One graduate student a week that has found flaws in systems from billion-dollar companies, right? So that's what we're up against when we think about securing cyberspace. The other piece that I want to make sure is clear, just to sort of to frame the discussion, is that cybersecurity is an interdisciplinary problem, right? Again, when we first started, it was computer science focused. Now it actually is extremely broad. So it's computing, it's engineering, it's policy, it's economics, it's finance, it's education, it's psychology. All these things are critical if we're going to actually secure our cyber infrastructure. So it's no longer just a technical problem. The last piece that I'll say, and I'll get off my soapbox, which is we talked about this a bit earlier, the education need, the workforce development need. Now, of course, I would love if everybody came to Georgia Tech and got engineering degrees and degrees in cybersecurity. I would love that, but it's actually bigger than us, and we desperately need folks that have certifications, right? That's all they have, certifications, that have experience at the technical college level, community college level, that have 4-year degrees, that have masters. We have an online master's in cybersecurity program, that have PhDs and beyond. We need folks at all of those levels to play if we're going to secure cyberspace. So I'm off my soapbox. I promised I would get off. And I'll start with the first question for my panelists, maybe if I can give it to Dr. Bailey and then maybe get Darren to answer. So can you elaborate on the level and scope of risk when thinking about the present cybersecurity landscape? Oh, man, I wanted to answer.
You can. Yeah, so I think it's, and again, I want to acknowledge the previous panel did an excellent job, I think, sort of painting a picture for us of what the threat landscape looks like. I teach the Introduction to Cybersecurity class, and we talk about this evolution of threats over a 20-year time frame, where we start in a world in which things look primarily like vandalism. Like the goal of the adversary was simply to say, hey, look what I can do. And moving into what was talked about, I think, a great deal, this notion of, hey, look, this is a resource. I can use it to launch attacks on other people. I can use it as an anonymous proxy so that I can pretend to be somebody I'm not. Or, even more importantly, there's data and information and money to be had if I engage in this. And then more broadly, sort of now we see this world as an acknowledgement that computing and access to computing resources and data represents power. And so it is, whether it's an hacktivist that wants to make a particular point, whether it's a nation state that's projecting power into cyberspace, this is a means to an end. And so I think we've seen this evolution over time, and the state of affairs is computing is everywhere. And so these threats themselves are also ubiquitous. As I said earlier, it represents power. And so if I can have access to the data, access to the computing, I can do any number of things.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think as we look at our own user profiles, as individuals, consumers, students, executives, whatever you may find yourself in the economy, in the world, you have a reliance on it, and so that reliance, by default, exposes you to, basic street crime. It's just that street crime has evolved to really go after all those things that you thought were sort of hidden, but they are resources, they are assets, and crime goes after assets. And so as we start to, really get our lives centered in that digital space, that is where a lot of our, sort of threat exposure is now sitting. And so as that increases, attraction to it, as individuals need, and I like the comments from the previous panels. It's a business to them too. We sometimes forget that they're organizations. They are not just random individuals. I think one of the senators mentioned the RICO statutes. I mean, that's why we have those RICO statutes, because those are organized, cooperating criminal enterprises that are looking to spend the least amount of money to make the biggest amount of profit. And sometimes we are those profit centers for them in terms of the data that we generate, the resources that we manage, or the assets that we hold. And so as we start to think about our reliance on it, that is literally a proportional threat exposure that we have to those individuals who want to separate our assets from us.
Thank you. Just to sort of drive it home, right? This ubiquitous nature of these attacks. Like, if you just look at the last 6 months alone, and I know the previous panel brought up some examples. Keystone Pipeline is certainly something that everyone's aware of and had impact here. But you look at things like Toyota lost production of all of its vehicles for a day because of a supply chain attack on one of its suppliers. The new Costa Rican president declared a state of emergency when the government systems were essentially held for ransomware. They blocked all the trade systems and then later blocked all the social security systems within this space. We see, this was a great press article, one of these cryptocurrency exchanges lost money, and the writer of the article called it GDP level theft, because we were talking about almost $600 million walked out the door. So there's this whole ecosystem, whether it's crime, whether it's, we see these, some of the projection of power to cyberspace playing out in the conflict in Ukraine right now as well. So whether or not it's nation states that are engaged in these things, whether it's criminals and criminal gangs, whether it's hacktivists that are trying to make a point, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and the consequences are extreme.
Perfect. So a couple keywords that I got. I did listen to everything, but a couple of keywords. So evolution was one that we saw. So these threats are absolutely changing. So as technology comes, as we move to the cloud, guess what? The hackers followed us right to the cloud. As we started to focus and connect more of our infrastructure, get critical infrastructure, guess what? They've gone directly to that. As the software became much more ubiquitous in everything that we have, literally, and it will be, in toasters, our threats will evolve and move to those. So evolution, it's a business. Right? Why do we keep getting the spam emails that are, things are misspelled? Because it works. Because you may not click on it, and you might have at some point, but it works. They actually make money. So those are, as we think about this attack surface, we know that it's ever changing, and this is important. It's a business. And so as we think about these attacks evolving, and this is a hard question. That's why we got these really amazing panelists up here and me. How do we begin to address these attacks? And certainly, Michael, as we think about in the future, right? So we got critical infrastructure that we worried about. We got additive manufacturing, right? 3D printers are great, right? Until we rely on them to be our primary, sort of supply chain supplier, and they're hacked. Right, so that's the future. These new technologies that may be hacked. So I want to understand that, but also we got to defend ourselves right now. I'm sure you're worried that Darren is probably worried right now that his cell phone's going to ring, because attackers are absolutely attacking Georgia Tech and everywhere else right now as we speak. So, Michael.
Yeah, so, my primary role in what I do today is obviously as this chair of this new interdisciplinary school, as sort of the first of its kind, I think in the world, At least I'm not aware of anything else that's done this kind of investment. So, I put my hat on as the chair, and I think go back to the missions of Georgia Tech. We have a research mission, and we have a teaching mission, and we have a service mission. So as a researcher, I think the answer to these questions about what do we do to protect is to look at the evolving ecosystem of technology. I think somebody said it before. The attackers are going to go where the data is. So it doesn't matter whether or not we're talking about the evolution from a desktop machine to the cloud, or now into IoT. We have all this home automation. That's information that they can have access to, resources that they can go get access to. You mentioned the toaster, and you got my eye roll from that. Why we're putting computers in toasters is beyond me. But so one thing that we need to do as researchers is think about the way in which technology is evolving and how it's impacting society, and think fundamentally about our responsibility as engineers. When we build these systems, we have a responsibility to think about security. There's this version of security that we see all the time, is that you can come in after the fact and sort of paste or layer or duct tape or whatever you want to call it, is we just sprinkle some security dust on this thing, and then magically the problem is going to go away. Whereas the real problem was one of design, which is that we didn't think alongside of cost and performance and correctness of the systems that we built, that security was going to be something that we really, really cared about. So that's one part, and it's the research part of the mission. And I think you touched also on this education mission. I think there's a short-term gap right now. I'm fond of this quote from, was it the CEO of Cisco at last year's RSA? And I'm paraphrasing here now. We could double the number of people in cybersecurity. We still would not be able to fill all the open positions that are out there right now. And so the previous panelists were talking about this challenge of, in the role for certificate programs, the role for cross-training people with different skill sets, getting them involved in the immediate need. And then we have this longer-term role at Georgia Tech of educating those engineers, and I think also this responsibility that people shouldn't really leave a four-year institution like Georgia Tech without some respect for the issues in cybersecurity, that we have an obligation to be training a cybersecurity literate society, that this is a problem that's not just a technology problem, it's a problem that we all face as we are dealing with these kinds of things. And so we have an obligation to make that part of what the experience is. Even if you're not an engineer, you should be exposed to those kinds of things before you leave tech.
I think sort of in addition to that, as we have individuals who are responsible for a variety of sort of business operations inside of our own organizations, they too have to become part of that extended cybersecurity force. They have to think about is what I'm doing exposing our data to compromise potentially, and me just trying to make it easy to get a file over to one of my colleagues. I need to now think, okay, is the most secure way I can do this? Is there a way that's better that doesn't expose this data that could be sensitive if it were to get out? Is there a different way that I can use the tools that have been provided to me? And so in terms of the evolution, we have to, I think, in addition to our professionals who are designing and engineering and creating these tools, all of us have to become, extensively, cybersecurity, if not experts, at least people who are engaged and willing to do battle on a day-to-day. Because, they're coming after your assets at work, but they're also coming for you at home, too. I mean, folks, we all have personal email accounts that are receiving these same phishing, these same spam, and really attacks, if we just want to speak very plainly about them, to get us to do things that we don't necessarily want to do. But we may not necessarily have the kind of the information to separate what's real, what's fake, and also to understand that, yes, it just takes you clicking that one time, to be able to expose yourself to potentially, damaging identity theft or whatever that may be. And so we all have to become students, and I think continual students of the evolving threats, and make sure that we are aware of the different ways we can protect ourselves, whether it be having a firewall at your house or making sure that you sort of monitor your activities online. All those things that you think about in terms of a cybersecurity team doing, you do have to do that yourself as well, and become part of that extended team. So I think that's part of the evolution in terms of making sure that we train all of our our team members, employees, all our staffers to really think about it from an individual perspective, how they fit into the larger sort of crew or team that is protecting, but also that all these attacks and threats, they all come down to, a lot of folks have talked about the power of one. It just takes that one time. It just takes the one compromised account that can lead to, more of either an organization, a city, a state. It just takes the one. And so we all have to be that one individual that is thinking about these things and really trying to operate in that world.
Perfect. And so I want to double click on that. Do people still double click? I don't know. Unfortunately. So I want to talk a little bit more about people. And so we can build the most secure systems, like Michael mentioned. We started the internet and decades ago. It was like, this is great, we can talk. And then we layered over years, and we continue to layer security on top of that. But even if we build security in, which we should, we still have people who have to use these systems and leverage these systems. And the weakest link consistently is people, it's individuals. And so I want to talk about that and just briefly highlight this tension between usability and security, which I know my colleagues harass you about daily, but there's a tension that's there. That's a real tension. And actually, Senator Dugan mentioned this earlier. It's if we can just go and shut everything down, but that closes Georgia Tech, right? So people, can we talk about that just a bit and this tension that's important?
So in terms of the people, I think the previous panel did touch on this very, I think specifically in terms of there is that fine line between adding friction to the daily, day-to-day operations and the daily course of your business and providing extensive protections. And so as researchers, faculty, students, those individuals come to this campus to do something that is, well, most cases, not related to cybersecurity specifically, right? And so, but I have the responsibility to make sure that whatever they're doing is protected. And so there are things I can do from a perimeter, from an external standpoint, but the strongest security actually comes from that individual having some level of knowledge and information and access to tools that they can then employ themselves at the point that there are, either accessing information, generating information, collaborating with their colleagues, whatever that may be. And so that individual training is so important. As part of the University System of Georgia, we are required to do cybersecurity training for the entire campus community as students, faculty, staff, twice a year. And believe me, that is something that we promote it. We get everybody, we send them an email. Sometimes I get people calling me to say, is this a legit email that I have to do this? And yes, it is. I need you to go in and actually be trained on this. Even with that, we still have compromises and still have individuals who are, fall prey to some of these either phishing or other types of compromises. But it's a continual thing. It's a constant thing that we are always concerned about because, again, there are things that we could do to really tighten security up, but it would be at the expense of the ability for folks to do the work that they're actually here for. And so that tension, I think, exists, and it really comes to bear when you are dealing with a researcher that says, hey, the nature of my research requires me to have some level of openness to the network. And I have to then wrestle with, okay, well, how do we protect what you're doing and not necessarily expose, the folks who are not doing that type of research, to potential harm or disruption. And so, yeah, it's a challenge, and it's something that we are constantly working directly with, actually colleagues and faculty inside of Michael's program, but also, experts across campus to figure out new and maybe more creative ways to provide that balance between creating a level of security that allows our data to stay secure, but also can still provide the opportunity for folks to create the new knowledge and do all the work that they are here to do. But it is a daily challenge, and we don't always get it right. We sometimes go overboard to try to secure, only to have to pull back a little bit to make sure that the work can get done.
Yeah, so just to riff a little bit on this idea of this trade-off that's come back and forth multiple times about openness versus security. My dad was an electrical engineer and he went to Purdue, and I'm a CS person and I went to Illinois. So there was a little of a Big Ten thing, there was a discipline thing at home. We would rib each other a little bit. So I came back from grad school and explained to him, finally came up with my thesis topic, I'm going to do computer security. Very patient, listened to what I had to say. You know, I was talking about I'm going to do computer security. And he looked at me for a minute and he said, that's the silliest topic I've ever heard of. And he said, I'm like, okay, what? He said, well, you know, and my dad worked for Northrop Grumman and he was in the military for a while. And he said, look, we know how to secure things. Like you take a computer, you lock it behind a door, and you put a Marine with a gun in front of it. And you're taking a computer and putting wires between that computer and teaching them to talk to each other, and then you're surprised when information goes from one place to another. And that's the crux of what we're talking about, right? We get value out of the fact that we're interconnected, right? But we want to do so in a secure way. And so how do we find that balance between that interconnection, that openness, and particularly the openness at a university, right? You can't lock stuff down. This is a university. You're supposed to have access to information. And trying to figure those things out. For us, this notion of people plays out in how the school is designed. I think SEP is unique in that it's an academic unit. There are only a small number of places where somebody has said, look, we're going to construct not just a center, not some collection of people, but an actual degree program and academic unit around cybersecurity. What makes it doubly unique, and I don't know of anyone else, we're an interdisciplinary department. So we have people from the business school, we have people from international affairs, we have people from public policy, and those people are included because this is a people issue. The way that we think about this is not exclusively as engineering, not exclusively as computing. We think of psychology and cognitive science. We think about organizational management, risk management, operational sciences. And we think about societal level impacts. We think about political science. We think about public policy. And so we reflect that idea that we're going to have to think about individuals and collections of people in what we build.
Perfect. So we are closing. So closing thoughts. And one thing I'll add, I guess, in my closing thoughts, and in addition to the folks that we have in SCP, as the senator mentioned earlier, and I'll go back to what I started with, is that we to get this right, nothing can divide us. We have to work together, and we've demonstrated that with developing this new school of cybersecurity and privacy. And so again, it's policy folks, it's business folks, it's engineering folks, it's computer science folks. But also, and folks you're going to hear from on the next panel, we have folks from the Georgia Tech Research Institute, right? And when you think about Senator Alberts, you think about response. They know a lot about it. They probably can't tell you anything about it. But Georgia Tech Research Institute, they have a number of labs, one with hundreds of folks, about 300 people, dedicated to cybersecurity. About 80% of what they do is DoD. A good bit of that is classified. And so the sweet spot for us in realizing a little while ago that we really have to, do what we've said is right, which is work together, is that we have this school that has folks from all over campus, as well as the Georgia Tech Research Institute and OIT, and that gives us the ability to project strength in the cybersecurity area.
Yeah, I think we can't undersell the notion of collaboration in this because, again, and I think the senators mentioned, the previous panel mentioned, this is bigger than any one individual, any one organization. Collaboration and coordination, I think, is the key to kind of broadening our ability, our capability to both defend and also to increase the tools available to be able to provide other protection to other individuals as well, other organizations. Because one of the nice things about being here at Georgia Tech is that it's not just that we have to do the regular job of the defense. We get to participate in some of the offense and the protection because our individuals are working hand in hand to create the new sets of tools, the new analysis, the new algorithms, to be able to mine through data, to be able to identify threats in a laboratory environment, and then be able to test it in the real world so that others in our community can learn from what we've experienced. Because the threats are daily, they're constant, and so as we learn and work through them together with this collaborative team, we're able to share that information out. And so it's one of those age-old problems that I think as humans we are always trying to evolve, always trying to get better. Cybersecurity is just another one of those areas that we have to do that. It is so imperative to our survival that we are able to work together and coordinate, because the bad actors are doing this themselves. They are collaborating. They are working together. They are creating networks and all kinds of organizations designed to advance the level of the threats that are coming at us. So we have to do the same and respond in kind.
Yeah, so we're wrapping up, so I won't belabor the point. And I agree with everything we've said in terms of the need of collaboration. I'll just say it's a societal problem, so it's going to require societal solutions. It's going to require all of us working together, whether that's government stakeholders or industry stakeholders, educational stakeholders, members of the community, to address something as deep and meaningful as this particular problem.
Thank you. There we go.
Thank you all.
We're done.
Is there any questions? Senator Rep?
Appreciate it, gentlemen. Cybersecurity is very important, and that's the front line of defense. When I was in the Air Force, who would realize that a thumb drive would create a vulnerability into our network? What happened was they had computers put together, I think it was in Eastern Europe, and they subcontracted part of the work to Russians, and they created that vulnerability, so we had to have part of our annual training, do not use a thumb drive. Because it's very important no matter what field you're in.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to call it the wrong thing. Don't y'all have a hackathon that you participate in here?
Yeah, in fact, actually, we do this all the time. So somebody was talking about preparation. Like, one of the best things you can do is actively engage in this kind of cyber warfare. When we teach students how to think about things, if I think about what differentiates a cybersecurity person from a computing person from an electrical engineer, it's this notion of teaching them to think adversarially. So we play a ton of games. So we are very fond of playing Capture the Flag, an activity where we give some sort of data resource that's protected through layers of security, and we encourage the students to question the assumptions of the design of those systems in order to capture the flag or grab the data element. So we do this all the time, and we've been blessed. There's been some great success with some of the teams here at Georgia Tech who have been quite successful at competing against other universities and other places doing that. But it's definitely a way we think about this particular problem. And again, what we'd expect to see if we were preparing, say, some public-private partnership to get prepared for these kinds of activities when they happen.
You're making me think maybe we should use the Georgia Senate as a testing ground for Capture the Flag. Might have fun doing that. So I do.
Be a quick exercise.
Yeah, you can say that I can't, so okay.
Maybe for you, sir. But I do want to thank all three of y'all for your participation. I mean, one of the things I think we're hearing again is just we have to figure out this network and training ground of how do we build this workforce. And I know Tech is the greatest school in Georgia, but I do recognize that we do have other universities, HBCUs, others that are working in the cyberspace, trying to train more Georgia citizens and build more assets across the state. And I think we have to figure out whether it's urban, rural, how do we get better at doing this and enhance, I think, everything that y'all are talking about. And quick shameless plug, the School of Public Policy, which I graduated from, is the best school here at Tech. See, you get to say these things when you're the chair of the committee. You can do whatever you want. But sorry, no offense to the Georgia fans in the crowd. But seriously, I want to thank all three of y'all for being here and your expertise. And I'm sure we're going to be calling on y'all for more discussion in the future. So thank you. Yeah. So the next panel, we're going to go ahead and start. And again, if you need to get up, take a break, move around, please do it. Is the GTRI Research in Cybersecurity, National and State Security. Will be moderated by William Robinson, the Deputy Director of Research, Information, and Cyber Sciences Directorate. And I'll let William introduce his crew.
Mr. Chairman, while they're coming up.
Yep.
Could you just tell us who's the #1 in the AP college football rankings?
Well, there are two polls, Senator Albers. Have you seen the coaches poll?
I have not.
Okay, well, we won't talk about Alabama. I'm just glad Georgia finally won a national championship.
Your son's in Alabama. I like it.
Okay, well, you should give Alabama a chance. Although, we take their business every day. William, I'll turn it over to you. There you are.
Good morning.
Thank you.
So good morning. I am William H. Robinson. I am the Deputy Director for Research of the Information and Cyber Sciences Directorate of the Georgia Tech Research Institute, or GTRI. So within my directorate is our Cybersecurity, Information Protection, and Hardware Evaluation Research Laboratory, or CIPHER laboratory for short. The CIPHER laboratory is a leader in developing the technologies that secure, defends, and responds to threats within our country's information distribution and network systems. And so today's panel is actually comprised of several researchers from CIPHER. At least for the format for this panel, I'll ask each panelist a question. It'll give them a chance to introduce themselves as well as comment at least on the topic of cybersecurity. And so I think to start off, probably how all the other panels have started off, I think it's helpful to start the discussion with an understanding of the threats and vulnerabilities that we face in cybersecurity. So my first question actually goes to Matt Gwynn. And so Matt, would you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your perspectives about the daily threats that are facing our government and local industries?
Sure. So, good morning. My name is Matt Gwynn. I'm a Georgia Tech grad. I've been with the university and the institute here since 1999. And I lead the Computer Network Operations Group at GTRI. We are our own in-house threat emulation group. And so what we provide to DoD, State of Georgia, commercial firms is the ability to penetration test, red team, basically all those activities where we act like the real-world hackers that we've been talking about this morning and help organizations figure out where their holes are before the actual attackers do. And so our group kind of grew out of a need to assess our own systems. Back when the Cyber Lab was stood up years ago, we wanted to make sure that our own systems were well defended before we tried to turn around and tell other companies how to do it. And as soon as we started doing that, we had external companies coming to us asking for help as well. And in the early days, most of those organizations were very similar to us. They were very IT-centric. They were technically savvy. But what's been really interesting over the years is that now, outside of the DoD, most of the companies that come to us for help are old school companies, places that have been around forever but are still coming to terms with being connected and how do we operate in this environment now. So that's things like power plants, water treatment companies, the entire transportation industry. It's how my team and I found ourselves sitting on a train one day treating it as a cyber system. It's something that's been around forever, and now it's got more computers than you can think of. One of the common through lines that we see, regardless of the industry that you're in, is there's all different sizes of organizations that we have, that we get called to help out, whether it's a small business that's kind of at the mercy of whatever security is built into the laptop that they bought at the retail store or ordered online. Medium-sized businesses, these are the organizations that have started hiring their staff, trying to get their arms wrapped around the problem, but they still have gaps that they need to fill, so they're coming to us. Or the Fortune 500s, the large-scale companies that can throw millions of dollars at this problem, but because they're so unique and so important to either our critical infrastructure or our economy, they have a target on their backs 24/7, just like we've been talking about all morning. So to sum up what we're all painfully aware of now, everybody's a target now as soon as you're connected to the internet. And so with respect to the threats themselves, like Dr. Bey has said in the previous panel, the number one thing that I count on as an adversary is time, because time is what introduces that human element into the equation. Over and over again, we've been asked to assess systems that are either brand new or have been recently patched, and they're good to go. They're the best representation of what this architecture is supposed to be. And as an adversary, we end up delivering a pretty clean report. There's not much that we can do. But that same system, a couple years later, maybe even a couple months later, if we came back and reassessed it, there could be a vast difference in its security posture. And it's because humans need to get their job done. We might choose a poor password. We may lift some security restrictions because we have a piece of software that's being finicky and we need it to work to do our jobs. So that's the space that we as adversaries work in when we have all the time in the world as opposed to a company that's just taking a snapshot in time. What happens is these companies tend to throw their hands up. There's just so much that's coming at them that they want to buy a single solution that'll solve all their problems. And so you hear things nowadays about like zero trust architectures and artificial intelligence, do-all systems that will defend your entire company. And there's certainly a time and a place for those, and they can be incredibly powerful, but they have to be implemented correctly. And that's what our job is to make sure that that's validated and to identify any gaps that still remain. And the last thing that I want to bring up, especially here at Georgia Tech, is, again, that talent pool issue. We are constantly trying to pull from within our own students on the university side over to GTRI so that we can get them trained up. And regardless of whether they stay with us here in the Institute or go out to companies within Georgia or to the DoD, we want to make sure that not only are they trained on these kinds of tactics, techniques, and procedures, but they're also very aware of the ethical considerations behind them. And so that we're not just putting knowledge out into the world, we're putting it out in a way that is effective and is actually pushing us all towards our common goals.
Thank you, Matt. So I appreciate the comments on the threats and how companies and industry are defending themselves. But you also did mention critical infrastructure. And so there are some critical systems that we rely on that need to be defended. So my next question actually will go to the next panelist, Sam Litchfield. So Sam, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and then also some of the work that you're doing that is protecting our nation's critical infrastructure?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. So my name's Sam Litchfield. I'm currently a cyber researcher within the Cypher Lab at GTRI. And in that job, I do a lot of work securing embedded systems, including some of the pieces of equipment that live in our critical infrastructure. But I am also the Cybersecurity for Critical Infrastructure Initiative Lead within the Strategic Energy Institute on campus. And in that job, I sort of corral a lot of the resources that we have on campus and at GTRI toward solving some of the critical problems that we have facing our critical infrastructure today. To your question, what do we need to do to secure the critical infrastructure that we have? I think that breaks down into a couple key sort of pieces. I could talk about the technical problems that we look at day in and day out, but sort of there's some meta skills that I think we can apply to the problem. The first one is sort of what we do already all the time, looking at sort of the traditional cybersecurity practices, whether that's improving vendor postures or network hygiene or user awareness of the threats that we face. We're getting better at that every single day, but that obviously is always something we need to keep our eye on and improve on. The second primary thing is improving the ability of our critical infrastructure and our researchers to transition the new technologies and new security practices that we have into practice and into our bits of critical infrastructure. And the bulk of our work in this space has been funded through the Department of Energy, and Department of Energy research programs are really good at enforcing us doing this through mechanisms such as cost share or requiring demonstrations at utility sites. In the past, we've demonstrated with our friends at Southern Company, and we've got several bits of technology installed in substations around the city of Atlanta. We also have a couple programs that we have talked about demonstrating at Marietta Power, as well as MEAG, various MEAG installations. And we've started talking to Colonial Pipeline about how we can apply things that we've done in other places to their specific problems. This is really useful at making us look at sort of both sides of that cybersecurity equation, because we as researchers and technologists want to build the next cool thing, and this helps us show what our technology is capable of to the critical infrastructure asset owners and operators, but also forces us to be aware of what their actual systems look like in the field so that the things that we build apply to the problems that they deal with every single day. That also enables us to sort of make the systems that we build as easy to operate and install as possible, because not every asset owner and operator is a Southern Company, and they don't all have the same resources to apply to this problem. The final sort of meta skill that I think is really going to enable us to secure critical infrastructure is bringing additional sort of enabling technologies to our traditional cybersecurity practices. We've talked earlier today about how this is inherently an asymmetrical game, and so our traditional solution to that is to sort of layer our defenses. Any individual defense is not going to be sufficient and is always going to be flawed in some way, so we build up this stack of things to protect our systems. Simultaneously, our infrastructure is the biggest physical and cyber system that we've built as humans. This is from the grid to oil pipelines to manufacturing. all of it is huge, and it includes the sort of physical underpinning that we can use and rely on some of the excellent work that people have done in these spaces in their various disciplines to add layers to that stack. We can do things like if they have a physics model of whatever their bit of infrastructure is, Power has this very extensively, we can pick up a command off of an Ethernet network and say, hey, model, is this thing gonna explode something, right? We can ask the physics model that these people have built in the course of doing their job to make sure that their infrastructure operates reliably, efficiently, and safely to add an additional layer of cybersecurity to those problems. So we need to really make sure that, to the early panelists or the previous panelists' point, we need to make sure that this is an interdisciplinary approach so we can bring in some of those traditionally infrastructure-focused engineers and help them help us bring additional layers of cybersecurity to their system. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I think another area of interest would be autonomous systems. And so we want to ensure that those systems are also trusted and reliable and resilient. So my next question goes to Jessica Inman. So Jessica, again, will you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your perspective on some of the research challenges within artificial intelligence and machine learning for cybersecurity?
Sure, thank you. So good morning. I'm Dr. Jessica Inman. I am the division chief for the Assured Software and Information Division within Cypher Lab. I'm also a senior research scientist with the Institute. So my division focuses on developing formal and AI/ML methods for enhancing cybersecurity, and also on determining the unique cybersecurity aspects associated with AI/ML systems and components. I am also a external advisory board member for the Pacific Northwest National Labs RD2C effort, which is an initiative to develop intelligent and resilient sensing and automation systems for cyber-physical systems. So William brought up autonomous systems, which we see more and more in our everyday lives. We've got self-driving cars, we have energy-efficient climate control systems in buildings. One day, maybe I'll have a toaster that'll automatically toast my bread just the way I like it. And these are awesome, amazing things. And researchers are currently developing AI/ML technologies to enhance these systems, which brings great promise and is especially, I think, really exciting in a critical infrastructure scenario. That if we can leverage AI/ML for autonomous control of critical infrastructure, then we can increase the performance of these systems, transportation systems, energy systems across the board.
Can I ask, what is that? AMIL?
Sorry, artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Okay.
It's quite a mouthful. So I'll abbreviate that as AI/ML. Apologies. So we would like to be able to leverage these game-changing technologies, things you may have seen in the news recently. There was generative art being created by artificial intelligence systems. Also, all of the translation you see online is artificial intelligence-based. If you have a little assistant on your phone or on a unit at your home, then all of that is enabled by artificial intelligence. So we would like to be able to leverage these technologies in order to enhance our lives in critical infrastructure scenarios. But when we introduce these elements into critical infrastructure, we're also introducing vulnerabilities into that infrastructure through things like sensors, algorithms, software, and even the way that software is implemented on the hardware. So we have multiple layers of security that we need to address before we can really be sure that the way that we're implementing AI/ML on critical infrastructure systems is going to be trusted and resilient and secure. So GTRI is currently working on addressing these issues by developing secure and resilient learning systems and also assured software and verifiable hardware implementations. Our research leverages extensive collaborations with Georgia Tech academic faculty. So this allows us to really leverage the world-class expertise that we have on campus here and bring that to bear against these national security problems. And it also gives us an opportunity to interact with the students at Georgia Tech and show them how their research can really have a positive national security impact and help them see how they can continue to make that positive impact even after graduation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jessica. since you mentioned about our students and that part of it, I would also like to know a little bit about our efforts to educate our workforce for cybersecurity. So my next question is actually to Mike Ruiz. So Mike, please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your efforts to develop some of the partnerships that are helping to educate and increase our workforce for cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. And good morning, Senators. Thank you for allowing me to participate this morning. My name is Mike Ruiz. I'm a principal research engineer and the associate chief of GTRI's Trusted Microelectronics Program Office. Also, Georgia Tech graduate, undergraduate, and master's degree, both in electrical engineering. After graduating, I was actually 15 years in the Department of Defense, focused primarily on the cybersecurity of embedded systems, and then I came here to GTRI as well to continue those efforts. And this morning, one of my other roles here at GTRI is as a student initiative lead here for our cybersecurity lab, specifically focused on developing that incoming workforce to support all of the great cybersecurity activities you've been hearing and all the challenges that we need. So I've actually been really excited to hear this morning, it's been echoed by the first two panels already about workforce development, and you as well, Senator, you brought it up twice already, the need for an increased educated workforce development to provide future engineers to satisfy these challenging needs. And we really have two pillars that we go through here at GTRI to do that. One is through our student experiences, and the other is through the diversification of our cybersecurity workforce. So from a student experience perspective, how do we incorporate and grow our student population into future cybersecurity engineers? And I think the key tenet that we do can be summarized as experiential learning. So students in class, classroom education, laboratory exercises, that's great for developing foundational knowledge, but you really develop your workforce through tangible, hands-on, project-based experience, right? Give them real work against real challenges, give them that experience early in their life, and you build that knowledge base, you build that passion, and you build that workforce that's ready to come in and immediately contribute to both DoD and industry cybersecurity concerns. So on campus, one of the key phrases that we've heard the last couple of panels, Sam mentioned it as well, interdisciplinary research. So we work with Georgia Tech campus. They have a great program called VIP, the Vertically Integrated Projects Program, which is an interdisciplinary approach to doing hands-on, project-based, multi-semester, multi-background student projects where students can take these classes in these specific topics and follow them semester to semester, year to year, building up foundational knowledge and taking a product from start to finish and getting like a real world, almost a business-like experience in the development of products. And here in Cypher Lab, we actually sponsor two of those VIP classes. We teach them, and they kind of touch on the two key tenets. One is what Matt's group does, as well as some of the work that Sam's group does. So in our embedded system cybersecurity class, we teach students to become kind of that white hat hacker role, right? How do you do penetration testing, red teaming, vulnerability analysis of some of our key embedded systems so that you can learn, one, how to spot and identify cybersecurity issues and vulnerabilities in some of these embedded systems that find their way into government infrastructure or critical infrastructure like industrial control systems, and how do you remediate those so that when those students graduate, they're able to immediately join teams such as Matt's to actually take those skill sets and perform them for our key government customers. And then on the other side, from a development perspective, we have another class, Configurable Computing and Embedded Systems, where we're teaching students how to design secure and trustworthy systems from the ground up, right? Where security and trust and privacy are first-class design principles rather than the notion of do something quickly, bring it to market early, and then try to bolt on security as you can on the back end, where you usually end up finding what Sam was referring to as security hygiene, poor security hygiene practices, right? Where you're trying to secure something on the back end, and you might have designed your system that essentially blocks you from implementing a lot of your basic cybersecurity principles. So through those classes, these students have the ability to design and develop those things, and we actually give them the opportunity to interact with our local governments. So for instance, in our configurable computing class, we've worked with the city of Atlanta before, the city of Decatur, to design secure smart city infrastructure. We were part of the Smart ATL initiative. We designed and deployed 5 embedded systems across the North Avenue Smart Corridor a couple of years ago. And the students had the opportunity to interact with government entities such as Atlanta's Department of Public Works, APD, Atlanta Fire and Rescue. They even met with the Beltline, representatives from each one of those groups to understand their challenges, what they use some of this technology for, and then how we can design secure systems that address those. Beyond that experiential kind of student experiences, here at GTRI, we have a very specific niche, right, where we're primarily working for unique challenges that the Department of Defense faces and cybersecurity perspective. So, we do traditional student internships and co-ops for all of the university system majority students and students all across the university. But one of the things that we do here at GTRI is when we bring them into GTRI, we give them real world projects, right? So they're working side by side with our full-time research engineers on many times classified or very critical nation state level cybersecurity challenges for those sponsors and those customers so that they're getting the opportunity to contribute back to society, both at federal government, state government, and in some cases industry as well. But they get the sense and of accomplishment for contributing to real world challenges so that when they graduate, they're again ready to go into the workforce. And Curly, you made a great mention of this earlier where you trained up a lot of students with cybersecurity expertise, and then you lose them to David in industry. Well, here in the federal government, when I was in the Department of Defense, we had a thing called STEMmerage, and that's real. So what you experienced there, the government and even GTRI, we experienced that tenfold. So we have a very unique set of critical cybersecurity challenges, and as we train up our workforce, we tend to lose those into industry as a whole, which is good for industry and cybersecurity as a whole, but it still leaves a critical gap for our Department of Defense efforts as well. So we work with servicemen and women to help develop that cybersecurity workforce as well through our Scholarship for Service program or our Military Graduate Research program, where we're taking service members and providing free education and the opportunity to work here at GTRI on specific Department of Defense cybersecurity related issues so that they can then go back to their home units and home services and contribute immediately. On the other pillar is the diversification of our workforce. So all the great student programs that we discussed before, we also do similar programs with a focus on underrepresented groups as well. So for instance, we work with our local AUC cluster, the Atlanta University Center clusters of schools. We bring in visiting research students from universities such as Morehouse. We are participants in the GEM Consortium, where we provide fellowships for undergraduate minorities who are seeking higher education, such as master's or PhD programs, bring them into GTRI, and again, provide them real tangible experience through internship programs while they're continuing to get their education in cybersecurity related degrees. And then finally, one of the big efforts that we've kicked off here at GTRI. So we at GTRI are what's called a university affiliated research center sponsored by the Army. So that means that GTRI is actually tagged by the Army to perform basic and applied research for the purposes of enhancing the Department of Defense efforts. And through those initiatives, we're actually specifically tasked with developing a diverse workforce capable of coming back into the Department of Defense to continue to provide an additional talent pool for cybersecurity efforts. Just this past year, we've had a great focus on cybersecurity within our DWD effort. We've canvassed the nation and spoke with over 20 HBCUs and minority serving institutes, specifically that have key expertise in cybersecurity, complementary cybersecurity areas that we at GTRI also engage in. Through those, we've had technical exchange meetings with many of those universities. We have actually developed 15 partnerships between key faculty and key students at different HBCUs and MSIs and GTRI researchers, and even developed up to date, just in this last year, through those key partnerships, we've developed over 10 actual joint proposals and studies that focus on key cybersecurity challenges for the Department of Defense. and then briefed those to a big panel of over 30 DoD sponsors that represent all the federal agencies, intelligence community, all the services, et cetera. And we're going to continue to pursue that. And then finally, as part of our key trusted partner stakeholder role, we're working with the U.S. Air Force, actually. So if you might be aware now that the Air Force is just put out a call to create the first HBCU-led or focused UARC contract vehicle as well. That's going to be focused on the area of autonomy. And GTRI, being a state partner and also being a UARC ourselves, we're a trusted entity, and we're working with the Air Force there to kind of be a trusted advisor and a mentor for this new UARC effort, so that when that UARC gets awarded with the consortium of HBCUs that win that, we're going to provide a key role in continuing to develop and enhance their capabilities to produce cybersecurity experts, specifically targeting the DoD.
Well, thank you, Mike.
No, thank you.
I do want to ask a question, maybe for any of the panelists who wanted to respond. So through the lens of your research, what's your greatest concern for cybersecurity for the industry, for government, maybe from the framework of the state of Georgia or our nation as a whole?
Probably the thing that concerns me the most, especially as you see hacks being reported on the news, and we're exposed to it every single day, just how dangerous they can be, is the sense of learned helplessness that you see in a lot of organizations. They just think that there's nothing they can do to prevent it. And so instead of working harder to try to prevent it, they try to buy their way out of the problem. We've talked about cyber insurance a couple times already today. We've talked about a little bit security through compliance. And what ends up happening is you have companies that want to just buy a product that fixes the issues for them and disengage from that human element. And that's what we're trying to do here, is introduce our organization so that we can work with these companies and say this is an ongoing process, not just something that you can purchase something that's going to solve for you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Jessica?
So my focus is really around artificial intelligence and machine learning. Personally, I think about that a lot. I think about how it's really done a lot to enhance our lives. And as I mentioned before, right, we see really cool stuff in the news. But what concerns me about this is that most of these algorithms have been developed in low-risk scenarios, where if that algorithm makes a mistake, maybe it's annoying, but there aren't really any consequences to that mistake. But when we start considering bringing artificial intelligence into critical scenarios, then mistakes really matter. And we know that these algorithms are vulnerable to mistakes. There's a huge body of research around determining vulnerabilities in artificial intelligence algorithms. For example, researchers have shown that if you add the right kind of sticker to a stop sign, then a computer vision algorithm, which is supposed to detect that stop sign, won't see it. You could imagine a scenario where an autonomous vehicle may then just blow through that stop sign, which could have pretty catastrophic results. So I think that we need increased awareness around the kinds of ways these algorithms can fail. I guess happily, Georgia Tech and GTRI are committed to increasing the safety of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. And even you may have seen recently, Georgia Tech was awarded a $65 million award for AI manufacturing. And one of the research thrusts in that is increasing the security around these manufacturing systems. So I think that us here at Georgia Tech and GTRI, we are aware of this as a risk, and we're currently actively researching ways to mitigate that risk and really make these dreams happen.
Thank you, Jessica. I wanted to turn it back over to Mr. Chairman if there's some questions from the committee.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think this has been really great. Not to make light of what you said, but in all seriousness, it reminds me of in the 80s, the movie War Games. I mean, just, fast forward to today where literally you're trying to build technology to avoid, catastrophic situations. But I don't think, in the public, we think about what does that mean, even down to that small sticker example, and how that could just totally, wipe out, a community or something if you have one little piece, vulnerable. So I think this is really awesome. I want to committee if you have any questions.
Do toasters really have computers?
I don't personally have a toaster with a computer, but I would not be opposed to one.
Senator.
First off, thank you. Everybody has been tremendous. Everybody has been tremendous in what they've been saying. I think a couple of things you pointed out that are of interest. We're talking about folks stealing, to the next level of having that war for talent today. We face that same exact problem at the state level every day, and the feds tend to pay twice as much, so we lose those in all sorts of levels. I think one of the things that I'm focusing on right now is we understand the work we're doing for the military Department of Defense. Very powerful, very important, et cetera. And then there are the large companies, as we talked about earlier, who have the resources and the manpower to handle that. But 9 out of 10 jobs are small, medium businesses, right? That don't have necessarily the amount of dollars dedicated to the staff, to the programs, to all the tools we need to harden those type of enterprises. And I think that's one of the things we need to look at from this committee. And I'd be curious if anybody has any specific thoughts of how do we help those areas that need it the most but have the least means to get to that, and whether that be that small, medium business or the individual who can lose everything by themselves as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. So we actually had a program a few years ago specifically targeted at this problem, where we went throughout the state of Georgia. We set up a way for small businesses to contact us. We selected 6, some here in Metro Atlanta, others further afield. But the idea was to start figuring out what that process would look like, and more so to get a feel for, a company that's trying to bootstrap itself from a 1 or 2 person operation up into something sustainable. What are they dealing with? And I remember distinctly showing up at one company in the morning, and their office was a corner cubicle in the side of a generic building, and there was wire strewn everywhere, and just the same router that you would walk into your retail store and purchase there. And they're trying to focus on getting their business up and running. They're not trying to focus on, is my WPA password strong enough to keep the guy in the next cubicle from breaking into my network and stealing my internet connection? So we have outreach programs like that. Trying to expand them can be challenging at times, but it's something that I do see at a national level. Some of our federal agencies try to do that. You have to get in line and you have to wait for it, but it is a model that I think could be adapted here within the state of Georgia, especially in concert with things like the programs that Mike has talked about. As we train individuals up within the university system here, that would be fantastic work, a great way to mentor students coming up on, here's where we start with these small businesses, get your feet wet here, learn how to communicate these things, which is a huge problem for me as the leader of a team that hacks, right? All my students want to come in and do the fun stuff. What's hard is finding effective communicators that can say, this is why it matters and here's how you fix it, right? So those are the sorts of programs that I think we need in order to be able to go out and make ourselves known to the state of Georgia and say, hey, if you need help and you want some guidance on how to do this sustainably, let us know, and we'll do our best to get you pointed in the right direction.
So I want to piggyback off Senator Albers, and I know we're a little over time on this panel, but we know the significance to small and medium-sized business. Do we truly know statistically or from a data perspective how many medium and small businesses probably truly go unreported just because, they just don't have time, they don't get it, they don't want to deal with it? But then those actors that may be attacked, like a small law firm or something like that, maybe are then just kind of creeping up and, starting to hit other Georgia private sector assets or things like that. Like, is there value if there was a way to create a mechanism for those small businesses to self-report, to capture that data? And then I know the next question is, well, what do you do with that data? Mm-hmm. But what's y'all's perspective on that piece? Just out of curiosity.
Well, from my perspective, you're absolutely right. There's a reason why small businesses are targeted. A lot of times that's where novel intellectual property comes from. But as we've talked about several times already this morning, the supply chain issue is looming larger and larger. And so as opposed to going out and trying to hack into a defense contractor, why not start at a third-party vendor and work your way up from there? As for statistics, nobody likes to self-report for obvious reasons.
Right.
So it's difficult to get your arms wrapped around that. But what's distinctive about small businesses is they're probably the ones most likely to outsource a lot of their technology needs to the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles of the world. And so perhaps instead of focusing specifically on the tens of thousands of small businesses, it's forming strong partnerships with the companies and the organizations that provide them with those services and ensuring that their security and their knowledge and expertise can trickle down to them.
Cool, thank you.
And from my perspective, in the critical infrastructure sector, small to medium businesses look like your municipal utilities or your co-ops or anything like that, right? And federally, the DHS's agency, the CISA agency, has already done a really good job of sort of doing kind of what you're talking about, where they have this kind of self-reporting capability for these small to medium utilities to report compromises or breaches and then report that up so that actions can be taken, whether that's publicizing the mechanisms that were used, whether that's making threat intelligence aware to the rest of the community, or any of those additional benefits that might come out of something like that. But that's a model that's worked for that kind of context in the past as well.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Jones looks like he wanted to ask a question. You sure? Just picking on you. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you to the panelists for your expertise and your
We're going to keep going. Again, take a walk, get some water, take a break if you want. The next presentation will come from the Georgia Technology Authority. I want to introduce Shanzia Thomas, who's the Executive Director and the Chief Information Officer for the state of Georgia. Shanzia, you brought your team with you.
I did. I brought Dave Allen with me.
Always great to see you.
All right, good morning. I'm Shanzia Thomas, State CIO and the Executive Director for GTA. I want to thank the senators for allowing us to come and speak to you today. We brought a few slides to tell you exactly what we do here at GTA and all the agencies that we serve. I brought with me my CISO, David Allen, so I guess we'll get on with the presentation. We're going to go through our agenda, which includes an overall overview of the agencies and the services we provide. Then David will give an incident response and cybersecurity considerations, and then we'll open the floor for questions, okay? Next slide, please. Again, I'm Shanzia Thomas. I just introduced myself. I think everyone knows me. Next slide. Okay, so this slide will show you exactly how the state agencies are divided up and what we do with those agencies. The scope of work that we do there. The small white circle there, you'll see 14 agencies there, where we provide full services to those 14 agencies, and they are considered our GETS 14, if you've heard of that. The GETS 14, which is the Georgia Enterprise Technology Services that we provide, from phones to disaster recovery there. There's about 40,000 users within those 14 agencies. The slightly larger orange circle there, you'll see, there's 88 agencies there with 59,000 users, and they only get 7 of the 9 services we provide, from phones to, we don't do their endpoints, and we don't do that disaster recovery for them. And then the larger box is only about 1,200 plus entities, where there's about 100,000 users there, and we only serve them with networks and phone, okay? So this is how our agencies are divided up. There's a lot of great work that we do at GTA. David's going to talk about what we do, what we have done, and what we will continue to do to protect the state infrastructure and data. I also want to thank the Governor's Office and the Office of Planning and Budget for investing in our efforts in fighting cybercrime. Again, this is not an individual sport. This is a team sport, and we're always willing to collaborate with others to help in this fight. I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Shanzia. As mentioned, I'm David Allen. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer. I have held this position for almost 3.5 years now. I also sit on Governor Kemp's State Cybersecurity Board. When I'm not busy securing the citizens and agencies of Georgia, I'm also an executive in residence at Georgia State University, teaching the master's program in cybersecurity. So I feel like I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of what's going on in Georgia. But probably more importantly, Mr. Chairman, I'm a Tech season ticket holder, so go Jackets.
That's what I'm talking about. See, you already got bonus points.
Next slide, please. So I want to start just going over an overview of our Georgia cyber dependencies, just how we're arrayed now organizationally. You see Georgia Technology of Authority in the center there, my Office of Information Security. Any kind of cyber incident that gets reported, even prior to House Bill 156 flows through my office. Now, Director Stallings has stood up Emergency Support Function 17 for cyber within his agency, and I have personnel embedded in that to support that. So in the upper right there in the Fusion Cell, that was between GTA and the Fusion Cell has been the traditional cyber before I came on board, before we started kind of expanding operations. So that was mainly a law enforcement focus. We had intel analysts embedded there as well. So that just brings together all those three-letter agencies from a law enforcement perspective. You got the GBI, AG, IG moving down to the right. So, AG counsels us legally, incidents, anything to do with our cyber insurance policy. Internal investigations for insider threat, of course, would involve the Inspector General. Moving over to the left over the DOD. As many of you are aware, the Georgia National Guard, where I was at before coming into this position, has a cyber protection team. We are very much partnered with that team. We have utilized that team in support of local government for cyber events over the past 3 years. So that is a strong relationship that continues to pay dividends. Then we mentioned the GMA Homeland Security relationship. We also have our federal partners, CISA. As mentioned in the last panel, continues to, grow and expand services, both supporting public and private. We have a close relationship with them as well. And over the past 3 years, I'm happy to report we've been able to really strengthen ties between agencies that, by Georgia statute aren't necessarily tied. So university system, Department of Education, those are all important relationships that I've focused on building, and that we have great cross communication at this point. We share threat intel, we provide advice where assistance we provided as well. So we have a tight community among the CISOs, among the 54 states and territories as well. And then we're talking with our federal partners. I think they would all agree that for the purposes of Georgia, we are very much well postured to address some of the topics that y'all are trying to address by virtue of this committee. So we've done a lot of work, we've come a long way, but obviously there's a lot more work to do. Before I leave this slide though, we came here with the intent of addressing and maybe discussing around the cyber force, but I would like to, I've been taking some notes as our great panel has cycled through, and definitely don't disagree with anything all of them has said, but a few things I wanted to touch on. We touched on kind of the cyber warfare aspect. During my times at the U.S. Army War College, we had a lot of discussion around things like cyber warfare and autonomous warfare, not just in the cyber realm, but on the battlefield, and how our adversaries view that. Some of their views on that aren't as maybe reined in as ours from just from a what looks right standpoint. But I thought Jessica's comments were pretty good. That really hit home in a lot of those discussions in, what do we allow to be autonomous? What's that potential danger of letting things in high-risk situations make decisions on our behalf? So when it comes to these advanced systems and we detect new threats, there'll always have to be a human in the loop, and we'll always have to have trained humans in the loop for those critical situations on what exactly to do. We've done a lot of work on cyber positions, so we've really lowered the barrier to entry for positions in the state. At this point, all you need is a high school degree and a certificate. We've been successful in hiring some at that level in order to, expand our pool. When it comes to exercises, we mentioned some of the capture the flag. Next week starts our 4th annual CyberDog exercise in cooperation with the Georgia Cyber Center, where we bring in state agencies, IT and cyber folks, and we actually put them on a live range to defend against an adversary. This year we have the Air Force's 305th Squadron serving as our red team, so that has continued to pay benefits for the state. And as far as the trends, we've seen the same trends here in Georgia. Increased business email compromise. We had a lot of agencies hosting their own email that's since moved to cloud. The threat has obviously followed us to the cloud as well. But in terms of how sophisticated the threat is getting, they're getting very good at doing things like we call living off the land. They're using tools that exist. They have a positive purpose, but once they hack networks, they can modify them to their own nefarious purposes, and they become very hard to detect. So the next generation systems are absolutely going to have to be focused on behavioral detection, what normal looks like in the network as opposed to static indicators of compromise and signatures, and we're certainly orienting the state in that direction as well. Next slide, please. So just to do a little deeper dive on my office and how we're arrayed as far as lines of effort, I'm highlighting incident response here because when it comes to, what's the one thing that really brings in all our government organizations for collaboration, it's that. We do much as the left of bang as we can, but resource-wise, we're and it's also, willingness on people outside our authority to participate in some of the services we provide. But when the call comes, we meet it, but incident response up to this has been that primary mechanism for collaboration. And thankfully a bridge for other things after that, but up to that point, there's a number of organizations that we've never really dealt with until they have a problem. So that's, for the most part, been the mechanism for our relationship building, is there's been an emergency, they didn't know where to turn to for help, they come to our doorstep, and we leverage all the resources we have available in order to do that. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give just a highlight. As all of you know, House Bill 156 was passed a couple years ago. I guess the primary issue we were having up to that point was, not everything was being notified at the point of incident. Sometimes there was considerable delays between an event being identified by a local government or an agency and it actually getting reported up so we could leverage some resources. I believe that bill really helped out to help us, get in front of a problem once it occurs rather than playing catch up. But once that notification comes in, even if it comes directly to me, we log that with GMA in compliance with House Bill 156, and we decide where to source that. Something could flow to the National Guard if it's a local. We've trained our own team in incident response and have some capability there. We also have a validated pool of security vendors that we can pull from very rapidly, and we've extended that level of support to local government as well in times of an incident. So in terms of capacity, we've really grown it. But as we've discussed today, often the threats and the ability can quickly grow and outpace that capacity. So if we had 2 or 3 simultaneous events, catastrophic events, we would be hard pressed to meet that readily. So that's why that relationship with emergency management agencies is so helpful. Cyber could scale out. It could end up having physical impacts at some point. Things we're used to and very, exercised in responding to, but we still have to exercise that cyber piece of that in the future. Next slide, please. So on the subject of the Civilian Cyber Corps, I just wanted to bring up a little bit of history to the committee. So when Ohio passed their legislation a couple of years ago, we actually had some discussion on our side of the fence. And of course, I mentioned our relationship with the other CISOs and CIOs amongst the other states. So, organizations like NASIO and the National Governors Association. We've had these types of conversations at that level over the past 3 years. But the two we highlighted at the time on just the what if for Georgia at the time, and that's kind of where it left, where we left it. So I'm very happy to see this kind of committee pick up that conversation. Was first Ohio, which the route they went was to embed that in the National Guard by way of their state defense force. We've already had a participant here today that, in addition to their full-time job, decides to devote their time to the state defense force. And then Michigan. Michigan was really the first one. They're still doing it. I've had numerous conversations with some of those folks between my uniform time and now on how that's working. They didn't go to military route. They built it from scratch and are continuing to try and sustain that program. They also have some cyber range capability they built out as a part of that. That was a little bit of inspiration to what you see in our own capabilities down at the Georgia Cyber Center today. So just for our own state defense force, that's an auxiliary unit that reports to the Adjutant General. It's part of our Department of Defense. A group that isn't all volunteer force, organized, trained, disciplined for rapid response. So in terms of consideration for where we go, I just wanted to throw that out there in terms of a reference point for our own state. For those that may not be familiar with the Georgia State Defense Force, one of the most robust in the country, by the way. Next line. So when you can go out to the National Governors Association site, I believe they published a white paper, just this year that kind of reviews across some of the states, this very subject. So, we've had a few go out of the chute before us. Obviously, we want to take some of those lessons learned out of that and make this the best we can be if we do, in fact, have a cyber force at the end of the day. But I just wanted to pull some highlights out of some of that documentation for analysis and additional consideration by the committee here. First, at any time we're sending someone to respond to an incident, it could be a small business, could be an agency, there's always an element of liability. So you can go and look in the news in certain situations where people that have been employed as pen testers or incident response somehow get held liable for some action they took on a network that maybe caused some damage that wasn't intended for what they did, but still, the players that do this type of thing need some modicum of protection. So, in our own efforts, we have partnerships that engage in white hat hackers in the state against some of our external websites, and a hold harmless clause. We include that for that very thing. That's definitely a consideration. Background checks, you want to make sure the people that are serving you and potentially coming into contact with sensitive technology and information have the ability to do that. Potential reimbursements, some of this may include travel. When you look at the map of Georgia and kind of where all the cyber talent is, it is very Atlanta metro centric. So then logistically you have to start thinking about, how do I deploy and respond to something in South Georgia or some of the more rural, counties that are really the ones that, have less funds, have less capacity, have less talent, living in those areas, things of that nature. And then finally, sustainability. And I think this is the most important point. If you go talk to the folks out of Michigan, that's really been the lessons learned for them. Like, great idea, has briefed well, they've had some great successes, but the sustainability factor is something they're constantly struggling with in, retaining, vetting, keeping them trained, as the industry progresses. All those are challenges we will have to address, in addition to the considerable overhead that just exists with attracting, onboarding, equipping people as they come into the force and leave the force. Just think of the HR functions that just surround any organization that has to deal with people coming and going. They would tell you that's something they definitely struggle with. So I think we've mentioned just our partnerships here, university system, technical college system. Obviously, we have a great opportunity with the pipelines there, and then the universities with the cyber programs. Still think there's definitely a lot of upside and potential for continued collaboration to meet some of these needs within the state. So I definitely thank you for your time and open to any questions.
So one question I had just right off the bat, if you pull up the last slide just real quick, I know you listed a bunch of universities. Have you reached out or do you do any work with like Savannah State or Payne College or any of the other HBCUs?
Nothing directly. I mean, really at this point, our relationship is directly with the university system, Chief Information Security Officer Alfred Barker. So, you know, I participate in conferences with the information security community at the university system level, you know, and we share threat intel as we get, you know, threat intel from, you know, things like the MSI SAC, you know, we share those types of things. Really haven't had a driver or a catalyst for anything more than that up to this point. But like I said, there's a lot of potential there.
Okay. Let's see what questions the committee has. You good? Yeah, I don't have too many questions. I mean, I think this is really good information. I mean, what I see in this is probably a lot of opportunity in terms of how do we enhance what we're doing. I mean, I guess one question, I mean, this may be a silly question, but is there anything going back to when House Bill 156 was enacted that maybe we should consider needing to update or change since that was a few years ago? Is there anything in it in terms of how you do business today that, you don't have to answer that right now, but if there's recommendations, because I know every time the General Assembly passes a law, you know, every couple of years it's already outdated. So I figured there's probably something that, you know, would make it maybe more effective or, you know, in terms of efficiency or maybe demand funding that would make your agency, you know, whether it's more capable or whatever to reach those goals and successes that you all have every year.
Yeah, a couple of things. We've had a few questions. So, you know, maybe we just look at the language and make it clear where we can on what's required, not required. So we end up kind of trying to interpret that a little bit for organizations. The second would be just getting the word out. I mean, at the time, there was a number of very high-profile pieces of legislation out there. I feel like it, you know, may have not gotten the attention that it deserved, especially when you start talking to people at the local level. There just doesn't seem to be a general awareness of it. So I think those two things together, otherwise it definitely has had an impact and increased the amount of people that are reporting right away when things are out there. Just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm reaching out because I know this is out there. And we kind of guide them through the process.
Okay, cool.
I would imagine that there's an interface between the cyber programs with universities, business. Oh, sorry about that. I would just imagine that there's quite a bit of interface and coordination between businesses and the cyber programs at the universities.
Yes, sir. I think that's a great point. So when we're talking about how we serve the small, the medium-sized businesses, you know, a few years now, I've had several occasions to be able to partner with the Carl Vinson Institute at UGA. I know they have a lot of touch points into the business community there. So it's like if we're looking for a bridge into that and opportunities to collaborate and leverage things as a state, I think that's your starting point. They're already building those relationships. Each university may be kind of building them in their own silo a little bit, but I think there's some cross-pollination that can occur and take more advantage of those relationships they've been building for years.
Is there a venue that exists today, and I guess I could ask the Georgia Tech folks this, but is there a venue that exists today where these universities come together and have cyber discussions amongst themselves, whether it's academia or bringing in the private sector, working with state government? I mean, but amongst the universities, is that conversation happening?
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
And we also have Michael Schaefer here from Douglas University as well.
Okay. So as part of the USG, University System of Georgia, all the CIOs have a organization that meets on a monthly basis, in addition to the Chief Information Security Officers as well. I think was mentioned here, Alfred Barker is the USG CISO, and he convenes that group of the university system CISOs, and so they meet on a monthly basis and have 2 annual meetings a year. And so yes, we all coordinate both information, activities on a really kind of daily basis, through communication channels. And when incidents occur, they are kind of brought to the system office first and then communicated around and then up through to the Georgia office as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I had the opportunity to speak at their one of their annual information security officer conferences back in May that they had. So it was a great event. I think, they have a good strategic plan. They asked for a review from me, and we've had some conversations around it. So I think they're doing a lot of good things with that community and with the strategic plan they have there for the university.
Awesome. Senator Jones.
Good morning. On the other states there, because you say they reviewed Ohio, are those other states also voluntary forces, or are they different? They're also just voluntary, as you said?
Yes, sir. They're voluntary, but they're a mix of some guards, some just from scratch, like I mentioned with Michigan. I don't have Texas up there. I want to say Texas does have something, but I don't know if it's via actual legislation or not. But varying levels of success, though. That's why I kind of highlight the Michigan and Ohio. But I would say across the board, these issues or areas that you'd address would probably represent challenges for all those organizations, no matter how long they've been around. That's consistently what we're seeing on, out of those programs.
And then also, what would be some, because you talked about significant administrative overhead and funding consideration as the program grows. Could you just give me a couple of ideas what the funding considerations that might exist as the program does grow?
So with cyber, obviously, it's a skill set that you have to maintain and how quickly everything advances. So, it's hard just to bring in individuals. Like Shanzia mentioned, it's a team sport. So you bring them in, you form a unit. You have a few things you have to do. One, you've got to validate the person. You want to test their skills and make sure that what they say they have, they actually have. And you want to be able to organize the unit. Cybersecurity has become very complex. There's a lot of people with a lot of different skill sets. So you want to validate, you want to conduct individual training, you want to be able to conduct collective training before you actually send them down on a network for someone. You don't want that to be the first time that you have those individuals come together and actually do something. It's not very efficient. So, the training, the time on the ranges in a zero defect environment that we've mentioned, and leveraging our resources, I think will all be important elements to make sure that force structure is going to be, viable and successful when we ask them to do things. Otherwise, I think, eventually you'd have attrition, and if you don't treat them right, you don't take care of them, they're going to ask why they're, giving up their volunteer hours. So that's really what I'm getting at there.
And one of the things we're doing is working with TCSG on bringing in some of those skill sets. Those skill sets are hard to find. Once we get them into our agencies and we get them certified, we have private sector companies stealing them from us. I mean, that's just part of working in the public sector. But we are trying to bring on internships to help bring in more resources, not just for GTA, but to place them within our agencies as well, to maintain those skill sets that we're lacking.
And a key will also be, I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Was Ohio the only one that paid for their cyber volunteers during their deployment, or did the other states also pay for their volunteers during their deployment? Ohio's legislation allowed for cyber volunteers to be paid during their deployment. Was that the only state that
did that? The only one I'm aware of, at least to some level, they at least other states try to reimburse for things like travel costs and other things of that nature to try to make it easier. And I would tack on to Shanzia's comment, you're going to need some young skills in the door, some new recruits, but you're also going to need experienced management there. So just, again, would like to highlight tons of veterans out there, a lot with cyber skills that still have a desire to give back. I think you would see a good response from those types of individuals as well.
Awesome. Any other questions? Thank you, David. Thank you, Shanzia.
Thank you very much.
That's a good idea. Let me make a note of that. So next we have Fortinet, Jim Finger.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Morning.
Senators. My name is Jim Finger. I'm the Georgia Government and Education Team Lead for Fortinet. With me is Jason Matthews. He's our engineering team lead. So legal disclaimer for any attorneys in the room or online, this is for information purposes only. Yeah, so we're going to talk to you today about SIPA compliance, the Child Internet Protection Act. I'm sure, Senators, you remember House Bill 1217 last year. This is an over 20-year-old federal law that's required, but not federally funded, right? And so what we hope today to do is to educate you on what's required in the Child Internet Protection Act and maybe things that we could possibly do to improve that. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, just to level set the senators about Fortinet, I'm not sure if you've heard of Fortinet. We're a global cybersecurity company. We support education here in Georgia. Here's just a couple listings of some of the Metro Atlanta school districts that depend on Fortinet for SIPA compliance. We also help universities and government agencies across our great state. Next slide. So we're going to turn it over to Jason to give you an update, an overview of SIPA.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Senators, everybody in the room. So we've had GTRI, we've had Georgia Tech, we've talked about research, how to protect universities, we've had the state. So we're going to back up and talk about the kids, right? That's where we're at. So internet, new, 1990s, we all remember this, right? You had a dial-up modem, your brother would pick up the phone, kick you off the internet, we all remember that. So one of the first things that happened was, how do we protect the kids, right? What do we do? So in 1996, we tried to pass this Communications Decency Act. It was slammed down almost immediately unconstitutional. We're blocking constitutionally protected activity, right? So that didn't work, we tried again. Child Online Protection Act. Took a while, eventually unconstitutional again. So back to the drawing board. I want to mention this just because it's similar and it's something you will see whenever you're researching this, which is Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which we know about. This is protecting information of kids under 13. It's not what we're talking about here, but I want to mention it. But we're going to talk about SIPA, which is Child Internet Protection Act, and you can go to the next slide. The important conversation here is, why do we need this? And there's a bunch of reasons, but specifically federal funding. So when the internet was new and now we're putting computers in these classrooms, it becomes, all right, well, we're giving kids computers. How do we make sure that they don't do something wrong, right? How do we protect that information? So here's the quote, right? Protected in Congress 2000 to address concerns about access to obscene or harmful content over the internet. Next slide. Really quick, because you'll see this too, is this thing called NSIPA, which very similar name, obviously. It was passed at the same time. SIPA defines the fact that we have to have a policy. NSIPA defines what has to be inside that policy. And real quick on what we're required to protect with SIPA. We have to protect any device that we have in the room. So back when we had one computer in the room, we had to protect that computer. Now we have to protect the computers that we send home with kids or any device. We have to protect the internet connection that we give kids to take home with them, right? It applies to everybody. It's not just the kids' computers, it's the adults' computers, right? It's the workforce computers, it's the computers in the back room that the administrators use for whatever. If a child were to get back on those systems, we have to make sure that they're protected as well. The three categories that we look at: obscenity, pornography, and generally harmful to minors. They're broad categories. They do have legal definitions, which we're not going to talk too much about, given the first slide, right, about we're not attorneys. We're not required to protect audio or text, right? I'm not required to protect music or censor music. I'm not required to protect any stories or books. not required to limit access to social media or block certain posts in social media. However, and this was brought up previously, if there's research being done from the GTRI team where we have to do real research to remove that censor, we have to be able to do that. So we're not required to protect that. So if you looked back at the first slide about history of where we're at now, you saw those dates, 1996, 2000, when SIPA actually came across. And there's been a theme in this room today, which was time. We evolved. We had no idea in 1996, that we'd have a toaster, right? With a computer in it. We had no idea. We had no idea that we'd be in this room today. So we have to move forward because we've evolved. We have to stay one step above, right? We were talking before, we were saying cat and mouse, right? So there's tons of data, specifically in schools, universities too, but in schools, there's tons of data. There's tons of really, really good data. So we have to be one step ahead. Students now have so many devices, right? We have these Chromebooks, these one-to-one, projects. Does anybody know, I don't know if you guys know, any of you, what the average number of devices per kid in K-12? Any idea? Take a guess? 5. Close, 3. 3 is the average. So 3 devices per kid in a large school system, right? One of the big 159 counties, that's a lot. Anybody know for higher ed? I'm just curious. Any college? We're in Georgia Tech. What's the average number per student?
5.
Close still, 7, good guess either way. So 7, right? Price is right rules, right? So in some of our larger districts, we have 200,000 endpoints online at one time. That's incredible. That's 200,000 opportunities to get in, right? It's 200,000 opportunities for a kid to take something home and see something they shouldn't see. We also have encryption now that we might not have had as much, in the year 2000 when this was passed. VPN tunnels. Now kids know how to escape these things we put in place to protect them. Oh, I can just go to a proxy and get around a VPN tunnel. Also ransomware, we've talked about this, but the attack surface is huge. It's gigantic, and it's way bigger than it was 20 years ago. So we can do better. Next slide, please. So how do we do this is the question. We've given this presentation to a lot of the K-12 people in the state, right? So this isn't a new conversation, but there is a part of SIPA compliancy, which is we have to have a policy defined, put in place on paper, and discussed for these federal funds to be provided to these K-12 counties. So there's 3 steps to do this. 1 is we have to pick a measure, which we're going to talk about. 2 is we have to write that policy and what's in that policy, and it's our job to kind of define what's in that policy. And then we have to have a notice, public meeting to discuss that, give somebody an opportunity to, not like it or raise their hand or complain or whatever it might be. So let's get started. We'll go through this quickly. First thing we have to choose a measure. So how do we do this? There's a bunch of different ways, right? You can use hardware. So in this case, generally it's a firewall. Most people know what a firewall does. We can also use a proxy instead. And what we're choosing is a piece of technology that can filter, right? That can protect these kids, that can eliminate harmful stuff. So we can do it with hardware. We can do it with software, right? You can use an endpoint software, whatever you want. In the case of Fortinet, and I'll speak to Fortinet. There's other products that can do similar things with similar success. But you can put a filter on the endpoint as well. That's an option. And number 3 is you can do it at the ISP level. So this is either what we give to the kids to take home as an ISP, or it's maybe a firewall that the ISP might have to manage. There's some kind of state-provided internet in some places. One more. And this is a great conversation, and anybody can go and Google this at that URL right there. Google releases information on the types of traffic that we see come across Google. Back to when they started tracking it, January 14, about 50% of traffic was encrypted. So we could basically see 50%, and then 50% was hidden. Fast forward to now, this is, I guess, when I took this screenshot. 95% encrypted traffic. So what does that mean? It means I can see that there is traffic going across my firewall. I have no idea what it is. Generally, I know where it's going, right? Who's trying to get there, but I don't know actually what's inside that packet. So we have this thing called SSL decryption, which is the ability for us to see inside that packet. And without going into a bunch of technical stuff, we call it a man-in-the-middle attack. It's basically you come to me, I look at it, if I want it to go on, I send it to the endpoint, right? We do this on firewalls nowadays called next-generation firewalls. And the term next generation has been a theme, which I love. That's compared to like a traditional firewall that can't do that. So in the year 2000, we didn't really have next-generation firewalls, right? So we're improving. And speaking of, next slide, please. Speaking of inspection, SSL inspection, when we talk about the ISP, what happens if you provide, because maybe it's low income or something, you have to provide a student an internet connection. And we usually do it with a hotspot, right? I don't know how many people in the room have kids with hotspots that they're sent home. All that hotspot does is connect to whatever provider gives access to that kid to get online. How do we know what they're doing? We have no idea, but we provided it to them and we have to protect it. So how do we protect it? We have, I have one here. Not that I would have planned that. There's a hotspot. So this is a Linksys product called Homework for Education, and it's just one example. Fortinet's the only one that does this, actually. This hotspot is SSL inspection built in. So you send this home with a kid, it's the only hotspot where that kid, when he connects to it, automatically goes to a firewall in the cloud before it's sent to the endpoint. And it's our duty to inspect that traffic when we send this home with kids. And this is E-rate fundable, by the way. Next, please. And this is important because of that first slide, which is filtering has to be disabled. So part of the reason that the failed bills were deemed unconstitutional is because we were blocking constitutionally protected activity, right? So we have to have this ability. Next, please. And really quickly, that was the technology protection measure. That's choose a piece of hardware or a piece of software or an ISP, right? You have to choose that. Number two is we have to go through this policy. So what's in this policy that we have to have written and signed off by the county? That's it. We're going to go through these. Next. Here they are. So these can be really lengthy. We can be here for a couple hours going through this, but I will save you. The first one, this is the big one. This is general filtering. We have to protect inappropriate content. So how do we do that? There's a bunch of ways. Firewall, we've already talked about. Next generation firewall, so we can inspect that traffic. SSL decryption and inspection should be turned on. We can also do it with a proxy, which we talked about, which is a proxy device where you send traffic through a proxy before it goes out to the internet. We can, there's so many, again, I don't want to go too deep. Number two is with email and chats. And this is important too. So we've talked about email security, we've talked about ransomware and how these things get in, what happens, right? Somebody inevitably clicks a link in an email, they download something, there's an exploit, now we have ransomware, our stuff's encrypted, what do we do, right? How do we protect that? So an advanced mail system will protect us against that, right? It will explode those exploits in what we call a sandbox, which is another option. When we talk about chat rooms and chats between students, I said that I don't have to filter chats. However, there is something that happens in modern education, which is cyberbullying. All right, so how do you protect that? So we have ways to, because of SSL inspection, read those chats, determine if there's cyberbullying language, and then report it, to the parents or what have you. So that's number two. Number three, we have to prevent unauthorized access by minors. So hacking, for most people, is a bad word. Back in the 80s, it was not a bad word. It was a good word, right? We were nerds. So we wanted to do that, the movie Hackers or open source community. In this case, we mean hacking in the bad way, which is the war games example, going in and changing the grades. Sorry, that's not war games. That's Ferris Bueller. My fault. So in this case, we can do it in a bunch of ways. FortiEDR is a good example, some kind of endpoint protection. So this is, if we see some kind of hacking software, kids are smart. They go and download software that they want to use to hack. And we're at Georgia Tech. The kids that want to go and hack are the ones that we want to see grow and develop into good hackers. We just don't want them hacking into our school systems, right? So if we see some kind of hacking software on an endpoint, we can exploit it, right? We can destroy it. So number 4 is PII. How do we prevent PII from being found, being exploited, being stolen, corrupted, emailed out to the rest of the school, whatever else? I was previously in state government, so we had a lot of really cool data, and there's a lot of really cool data in school systems too. So the way we do that, again with the firewall, prevent that east-west traffic, right? And zero trust has been mentioned already in this room today. Zero trust is kind of the future of traffic, right? So we prevent that traffic to those great data systems. And number 5 is generally address measures designed to restrict access to materials. So again, firewalls, mail clients, sandboxes, endpoint protection, all of these things. And that's the policy. So once that policy is written, and again, this is to be SIPA compliant, to get that federal funding, these schools have to have that policy written down and then present it in a public meeting of some sort. So school board meeting, or I don't know, Zoom meeting, whatever school systems do now. People have to have a chance to ask questions, just as you guys are doing. Say, how do we address this? What about this? What about this? Once everybody agrees, it has to be done. When we presented this to several K-12 counties, the question was, how many of you in the room at the time have seen your SIPA policy? I think maybe one person raised their hand. So this is a policy we have to have in place to receive funding, but nobody's seen their policy. So how are we compliant? And then I say, when was your public meeting, right? And because of, you know, people leave, come and go. Nobody's going to remember what happened 20 years ago again. So non-compliancy, what happens if we're not compliant, right? We get E-rate funding as a school system to buy these firewalls, to buy this protection, to provide these kids for these machines, to buy these Chromebooks, everything. If we are not E-rate compliant as a county, and somebody finds out we're not E-rate compliant, we obviously lose our funding, completely lose it. So we can't buy anything else. Even worse, if we don't comply, the school system can be found guilty and have to pay back everything they've ever received, which is terrifying. It's a terrifying thing. Now, we're not trying to go and, I say we, the government, not Fortinet. We don't want to go and ask states to give their money back or counties to give their money back, right? But there is a complaint hotline, and we mentioned this. So this whole thing was Federal Communications Commission, right? Somebody can complain if they want to. And if they complain and somebody is found in violation, then these are the penalties. But frankly, nobody knows what the policies were to begin with. So we think we can do better. And the remedies, of course, if you are in non-compliance, you can just prove that you're compliant, do your policy, do your public meeting, and get back in compliancy. And here are some resources. One of these is, for instance, you can go and you can check categories of web pages, right? So if you want to see that a web page is violent or something, you can go and check a category, and there's a bunch of these online. So I'll leave it open to questions. I know I said a lot. And there's a lot there.
Yeah, I did want to mention something. So Jason mentioned that we had this presentation in front of a lot of school districts. So there was a standing room only presentation we did in July at the IT CIO conference. And, you know, a lot of CIOs are interested in this subject, but struggle with, as you saw, the long list of things they have to do. It's partially federally funded. The part that's not is the content filtering, which ends up being really expensive for large districts. The SSL inspection becomes expensive and is also hard to implement for a lot of the mid-sized and small districts. So they struggle and they're not compliant, and not on purpose. It's just they don't have the means to become compliant, right? So when House Bill 1217 came about, and it talked about like the hotspots that Jason talked about, the average district gets a hotspot that's just a generic hotspot, and it doesn't have any content filtering on it. But what happens when Johnny takes his dad's 8-year-old iPhone out of the drawer and just connects to it, and he's able to surf anything, pornography, whatever, right? But we're not protecting the kids. So, I feel that, we want to come here to educate you on the, on the law, the over 20-year-old law, but also it's a struggle for school districts, right, to remain compliant, because like I've mentioned, it's a federal requirement, but the parts of it are not fairly funded. So I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. It's been a really good discussion. And I'll follow up with you offline without trying, at least for my sake, well, speak for my district. Since you flashed up 2 of my school districts on there, see how well they're doing. Being a former school board member, I do agree with you that if we're going to provide the technology, hardware, or kind of open those gates, especially outside of a school building, then I think we need to make sure there's some sort of accountability in terms of, what are we using with that hardware for, that technology, and also making sure it's appropriate. And I know for rural school districts, I mean, it is a resource issue because all of them are underfunded. I know for Paulding County, Georgia, I mean, many people would not know this, but I mean, we're probably in the top 10 low wealth for being a school district with 31,000 kids in Metro Atlanta, and probably the top 3 recipient of equalization funding, right next to like Gwinnett County. And so, but I still think that, and I know our CIO, Ms. Ragsdale's, I mean, she's awesome. So I assume we have no issues there.
Yeah, she does a great job.
Yeah, she's probably one of the best in the state. I'm biased. But I think, as we think about long-term viability, we think about long-term funding. Every school district in the state, for the most part, is growing. So it's not like we're seeing fewer kids, we're going to see more kids. And I think the technology is going to continue to evolve. And I think especially too that even though all of our school districts are back in the classroom kind of post-pandemic, there still is a virtual element. And I know we see that as, especially we talk about college and university setting and online classes and everything else, and how we kind of package these things together to get more information to kids and students, how we're sensitive maybe to that. So I think this is very topical, and I think offline we can talk. I don't know if the committee has any specific questions or thoughts you want to ask.
You.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We're almost at the end. Thank you, sir, for coming today.
Good morning, Senators. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the GBI on this. I wanted to first point out that I decided to forego a PowerPoint and have provided you with a brief fact sheet over the topics. Just to give you a little bit of background on the GBI and what we've done in Augusta. Prior to 2018, most of the GBI's computer crime investigations was handled out of CEAC, which is the Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit in Atlanta. Their main focus is child pornography and child sex trafficking on the internet. So obviously the increases in computer crimes took a back seat to what was really important at the time. In 2016 and 17, when the Georgia Cyber Center was being planned in Augusta, the decision was made that we needed to do 2 things. We needed to create a work unit that handled computer and internet-based crimes, and we also needed to supplement that work unit with digital forensic investigators who work out of the Augusta area to service East Georgia in conjunction with our digital forensics lab at CEAC at GBI headquarters. The reason behind one of those is, particularly for cyber crimes, is that since 2017 through 2021, the country has seen a 500% increase in reported cyber crimes. When I talk about these cyber crimes and these reports, we get that information from the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, from the FBI. In 2021, or 2020 to 2021, we saw a national increase of 63%. Of course, this was the first year of the pandemic. And in Georgia, during that same time period, we saw a 45% increase in these reports. What those specifically represent is the amount of money being lost by citizens, by individuals, small and medium-sized businesses that are reporting to the FBI. In 2021 alone, $153 million was reported to IC3 by folks in Georgia. That's an extremely low number. It only represents what's reported to IC3. Department of Justice actually believes that represents 1/7 of the actual number. So with their estimate, we're talking about $1 billion that was lost in 2021 in Georgia. Gallup Research actually says that only about 1 in 90 actually report this to the
FBI. So the problem is much, much greater than what we actually see on the surface. What we have attempted to do in Georgia is, one, is to identify what our major problems are in Georgia and to try to start representing the individual and the small businesses that aren't represented by large organizations like the federal government, Secret Service, FBI, and others. We see that the number one attack that is being reported to IC3 has to do with email compromises or business email compromise. It actually represents not only the top financial loss of all for-profit cybercrime, but it beats
all other categories about 2 to 1. It's a
massive crime, involves phishing attempts, spoofed emails, spoofed phone numbers, compromised accounts, things of that nature. What we have seen as a response to this is how can a state and local agency, law enforcement agency, be effective in investigating these cases? And it's a very, very difficult situation. The biggest challenge that we found in cybercrime is, yes, we may have a victim in Georgia, but those responsible and those that are participating in the crime are somewhere else. So it's a very decentralized activity. As a result, when we knew that we had to have a partnership with our federal partners
to have any impact on this at all. So the Cybercrime Center
and the agents that are currently assigned there are all sworn task force officers with the FBI Cyber Task Force in Atlanta. We have one that is also sworn with the Secret Service Cyber Fraud Task Force, and one just joined the Homeland Security Task Force also here in Atlanta, so that we can not only represent Georgia's interests, but we also have participation with our federal partners for training, for resources that we don't have otherwise. There are several issues that create issues and challenges for state and local law enforcement.
And to illustrate that better than anything, the estimated solve rate for cybercrime is at best about 0.5%. The World Economic Forum actually estimates that it's closer to 1/100th of 1%. So 0.05 of 1% of all cybercrime is actually solved by an arrest. When you compare that to traditional crimes, the nationwide solve rate for homicide is 46%. So we are solving less than 1% of reported cyber crimes, and it's because of that decentralized network of these criminal organizations that are conducting these type of operations. There are other things that we run into that are challenges, the technological challenges, and several of the speakers today have talked about VPNs, which are a fantastic privacy tool.
But when it incorporates no communications,
that prevents law enforcement from being able to backtrack to the source of these activities. So if we're having email conversations coming in, usually it's spoofed, but working backwards, we can't get to an IP address beyond a VPN service
because they have no logs of that communication. Those and spoofing of email, spoofing of telephone numbers, and we've seen that recently in a lot of the swatting calls to some of the public officials and others in the state, create a technological roadblock for law enforcement to be able to work backwards, and that attribution to a bad guy is key. And those technological impairments are a major challenge and limitation for us. Others, just briefly, are that cyber law enforcement training, and not just digital forensics training, because we're fairly robust with that. We are able to train our digital forensic investigators well, but digital or cyber investigators, the training is few and far between, and where it is available, it's very, very expensive. That's one of the reasons that we partner with our federal agencies so closely. So statewide, cybercrime training is a challenge that we haven't yet been able to overcome except with those partnerships. Jurisdictional issues are tremendous, and I'm sure you know that just because the victim is here, we may identify suspects around the world or in other states, but depending on the case, we may have a prosecutor where they simply can't afford the cost of extradition to bring suspects back from another state to prosecute them in Georgia. That's one of the challenges that we have, is working with our local prosecutors to get those commitments on the front end to see if we find a suspect that we can prosecute, will you commit to that? And that is an ongoing challenge. Lack of those investigative resources. During the last 2 years, I know between 2000 and 2020, we saw a 46% increase in homicides nationwide. So the murder rate substantially, and the numbers aren't out for 2021 yet, but I'm fairly sure that we're going to continue to see that. Our law enforcement resources are being spent on those frontline issues, those traditional crimes in your jurisdictions where they have to focus on crimes against children, here to work these cases. So that's also a major challenge. There's also one other, and it's a lack of a unified deconfliction tool for law enforcement, meaning that if I identify a suspect in a cyber case, there's no way for me to check with other state agencies or federal agencies to know whether or not they're identifying and working on the same suspect. And we've encountered that several times where we'll have a case ready to prosecute and another agency comes in working the same target, and they take the case and prosecute it elsewhere. It's good we won, but it's a tremendous loss of resources that could have been somewhere else. So to answer some of those challenges, some of the things that the GBI Cybercrime Program are doing is, first is that engagement with our federal task force partners. We actually work very closely with the Secret Service, who has embedded 2 Secret Service agents with us at the Cyber Center in Augusta. One is specific to cyber investigations and working with NSA at Fort Gordon, and the other is our regional Secret Service agent. We also work closely with the FBI in Augusta and here in Atlanta. One of our biggest wins has been through participation with the State Attorney General's office. We saw these problems
early on when we started working these types of cases. And Laura Pfister at the Attorney General's office, in our conversations, we decided that the best target for state and local law enforcement is, let's find the criminals that are in the state that we can prosecute. Through that, we've created a cyber fraud task force through the AG's office, which has the participation of the FBI in Atlanta and multiple jurisdictions around Metro Atlanta, their district attorney's offices. What we're doing with that task force is, through those IC3 reports, we're identifying money mules. We're identifying people in the Atlanta or in Georgia that are moving stolen funds through bank accounts in Georgia through the money laundering process before they get moved on overseas to the main targets of these investigations. And we're trying to work those investigations in state where we can have prosecutions so we can dismantle that money laundering process and make it more difficult for the organizations behind these crimes to move their money and get paid. If we can disrupt that, then that's a major win. And we've had some substantial success in working those cases. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the Metro Atlanta area is the #1 location in the United States for money mules. And it's a significant problem. And I think that between us, Metro Atlanta law enforcement, the Attorney General's office, we're attacking that major problem. One of the other approaches is, any chance that we get, we try to publicize the use of the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov. It's remarkable how few people know about this tool. But because of these numbers is absolutely critical. The other critical component to IC3.gov that people aren't aware of is a team The FBI and the federal government love their acronyms. It's called the Recovery Asset Team, or the RAT Team. The Recovery Asset Team basically is the team that when your money is stolen and it's moved to another financial institution, if it's done within a very short period of time, they're able to stop the movement of that money and reverse it so that the victim gets their money back. In cybercrime, if we can get the victim made whole financially, then we won. Because, again, we have about a 0.5% chance of bringing somebody into a courtroom. So that is one thing that we do, is we push that. On the other side, the non-investigative side, we're always looking for the latest digital forensic tools, and we're trying to always onboard the best talent in digital forensics. One of the issues there, and I like the term that was used, the stemmerage that was used earlier, that's absolutely true. In the last 4 months between the CA ransomware cases and things of that highly technical nature, and being able to keep that talent has been a challenge, but we're constantly trying to hire the absolute best, and I think that we do. At this point is the key. I think that everybody that spoke before me is the key. Cybersecurity and cyber education, these are the key at stopping it, not at the source, but at the door, at our agencies, organizations, at our homes, to be able to stop this. There's a line from Ephesians that talks about the flaming arrows coming in. You have to get the shield. But we can build the shield that's necessary to stop those at the door. And just as a quick example of that, in the executive branch, we've seen in 2019 a tremendous number of ransomware attacks across the state of Georgia. After that, the state government introduced several safeguards. We have regular training for employees, mandatory password changes, multi-factor authentication that's required of all employees, and they actually removed administrative privileges from frontline employees so that you only had the software on your computer that you needed for your job. You couldn't download anything else, which means you couldn't download ransomware if it came in. As a result of that, those ransomware attacks against state government have virtually dried up, the successful ones. I think that that's the key, is continuing to work on those from our perspective, to be able to say this is what we're seeing in the casework that we're getting, and for those in cyber defense and cybersecurity to be able to come up with the mechanisms and the tools that are needed to be able to stop those at the gate. And I think that's a very successful approach, and it has been. With us in law enforcement, short of some fundamental changes that are constitutional, it's going to be a very, very difficult process. But I think that there are some serious people between us and our federal partners to find the solutions. One, like the State Cyber Fraud Task Force, if we can export that nationwide, then the Georgia victims whose money is being sent to other states have somebody in that state that's going to be able to go after some component of the crime. So I think that we're building. We're starting to see some tangible answers to the problems that we have.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Questions?
Because you were mentioning different agencies, so I just was trying to figure out what agencies are you able to directly, I guess, collaborate with by being in the Georgia Cyber Center?
We regularly work with the executive staff of the Cyber Center. We work closely with Augusta University And in the digital forensic capacity, what our interest is, obviously, because we lose staff after a short period of time, is basically creating a pipeline. So through Augusta Tech, through Augusta University, through their programs, for people that are coming out of those programs interested in digital forensics, we can time our application process so that we can bring those upstairs to actually start their careers working in digital forensics with us. From the investigation, closely with Army Cyber, the Air National Guard, which is located on site as well, and several of the local law enforcement agencies in that area. And that's an area that we're constantly looking for other forms of collaboration. I just spoke with Michael Schaffer last week about that to see how we can better work together between the missions. One thing that we have found is there are a lot of partners there. And there are a lot of brick walls between partners because there are top secret agencies that have different missions. And it's finding where we can work around those roadblocks and be able to work together. But we're constantly looking for that. One of the main benefits to being in that area, though, is that we do have a location where law enforcement can come to us without having to drive to Atlanta. And we've reduced the backlog for law enforcement investigations to almost nothing. So investigation that starts today, you can bring your devices into us tomorrow and they'll be worked on.
Steve, thanks for what you do. If you could wave a magic wand and budget was no issue, even though we know it is, what would it for you to feel we would be fully staffed and fully capable to tackle anything really necessary to protect the citizens of the state of Georgia?
Looking at it from, and I don't want to get into any, I don't want to get in trouble with my folks, but we have to find a way to ensure that our computer scientists are making a market. They're leaving us at a very brisk pace. We've been open for 4 years. My most senior people have been there 2.5. So we're losing people faster than we're gaining people. We're onboarding 4 in September and October just to take the place of people that have left. So in digital forensics, we're hiring people with master's degrees in computer science, and we have to be able to retain those people. The magic wand on the investigative side is a big Harry Potter sized stick. So it's some of this, and I always liken this back to the Wild West when the West was territory and it was lawless. And what we did then was we sent in and created the United States Marshal Service to go out west and bring justice to the West. This is a global Wild West problem. And a lot of it is in areas of the world that we have no control over at all. So the magic wand would be that there is increased jurisdiction globally, increased cooperation globally, so that we can reach out and get our criminals from overseas and prosecute them wherever that prosecution needs to be. The more reasonable magic wand is that attribution piece. The spoofed emails, the no-log VPNs, the allowing companies to have those type of products that may be for a legitimate purpose, but stymie law enforcement in our rights under the Fourth Amendment to be able to gather evidence against criminals is one of the most difficult challenges in cybercrime, is that attribution piece. The money mule aspects in the Metro Atlanta is traditional financial crime. We're following the money. That's easy. That's already been taken care of. The cyber parts of this is the difficult part. That's where they're able to use obfuscation tools to hide, be it truly anonymous, and it makes it almost impossible for law enforcement to do their job.
Thank you.
That's all I got. Steve, thanks for being here and everything your agency does for Georgia.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Last but not least, SHI Mark Yoder. Thank you for being here to
Senators, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. I'm very respectful of our time, so I thank you for the opportunity, and we'll get through the presentation here. My name is Mark Yoder. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Advanced Solutions Group at SHI. In my role, I work with public and private sector organizations, helping them grow and build and mature their security operations. So today I'll be sharing a little bit about what we've seen in high-performing cybersecurity organizations and building a sustainable cybersecurity force. Prior to coming to SHI, I've served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Texas Department of Transportation as well as Texas.gov. So I understand this term intentionally the stewardship issues with being responsible for the personal information of a citizenry in Texas of over 25 million citizens. So next slide, please. We'll speak briefly about building right, buying right, and how to end up with a sustainable security organization. Next slide. I think previous speakers, it's interesting to see folks from different backgrounds and different organizations and different views all have very similar findings. So I think that's encouraging that we're all on the same page. I think it very much needs to be a different type of conversation that we start to have as we build cybersecurity programs. The challenges that I think we've heard today involve ever-changing threat landscape. The landscape is changing, frankly, faster than a lot of our tool sets can keep up. Reduced visibility as we end up in the cloud and on personal devices. People and skill shortages, a resounding message today, and it continues to get more significant. That gap in security personnel, while magnified in private sector, is felt as well in the private sector as well, in public sector rather. And finally, vendor sprawl. In an attempt to keep pace with the complexity of what's going on from an attack surface, we've continued to build tools. What we need to move to is a more dynamic and intelligent environment. We need to automate and manage a lot of the manual processes. Part of turnover we're finding is not only the lack of ability to find skilled resources, but those skilled resources want to do the interesting security work and not the typical day-to-day mundane repetitive tasks. So the more that you automate those, you can mitigate to some degree the loss or the stemmerage as it's been stated today. Next slide, please. I think this will show our point that we're really finding that this is not a technology solution. This is just an idea of the vendors, all credible vendors in their spaces. But imagine trying to build a security program where these are interoperable. I think Dr. Bailey had a great point earlier today when he spoke about building security from the beginning. And this is really where we'll talk about how to build right from the beginning. Many of these vendors have great sources of information, single panes of glass, they'll be called. But imagine each of these single panes being to find out the needle in the haystack of what's actually going on to provide actionable information. Next slide, please. So building right, to start from the beginning, I think it's all about preparation. I know we've all heard the quote about if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. This is really about ensuring from the beginning that you're going to build something that's going to be sustainable and that you're going to be able to grow with rather than have to replace at some point. It starts with, why am I doing this? I think identifying the end-to-end reason why it's important that you do this, it helps you define the goal and hit that goal as well. Proper architecture. When I build this, will it work? Functionality when integrated at scale. This is ensuring that the technologies that we buy work together at the beginning rather than trying to build this. I'm originally from St. Louis, and when the arch was built, it did not meet at the top, which is an engineering disaster. They probably should have engineers from Georgia Tech. I'm sure that wouldn't have happened, but it did. And then to build a large-scale security function and realize at the end that you have scalability or integration issues is the wrong time after the funds have been allocated. The windows we know specifically in public sector to correct that wrong are significant. And finally, do we have the ability to change rapidly? Am I preparing my technology to pivot and am I responsibly using taxpayer funds? One of the challenges that I find within public sector is not only the length of contracting vehicles, but how to pivot out of those if technologies change over time. So I've heard it said that private sector dates technology, public sector marries contracts. So at the end of the day, do I have a technology now that will work through a 12 to 18 month contracting negotiation? at the end and maybe a 5-year contract. As we look back over our shoulders, the technologies of 5 years ago, even the phones that we carry may be significantly different in capabilities, and with the rapidly changing threat environment, the threats may change as well. Next slide, please. Buying right. At the end, buying end-to-end solutions versus results. Are we working with vendors and partners, whoever they may be, that have the ability to, at the beginning, get the technology right and scale, and at the end of the day, are you able to hit the goal of what you have rather than the individual point products? Procurement. Think end-to-end, aim at the goal, and prepare for the future. If that were the key phrase that I could leave the committee with, it would be think end-to-end in solutioning, aim at the goal that's predefined, and then prepare and right-size your organizations and your technology stack and your cybersecurity program for the constantly changing threat environment and rapidly changing environment for the future. And finally, sustainability. Am I preparing my technology to pivot, and am I responsible using taxpayer funds? This harkens back to the previous one. Are we identifying technologies that are able to pass the test of time? I think a prime example would be during the pandemic when organizations rapidly moved to the cloud. The challenges faced there were less about the cloud themselves than they were about the architecture that was in place from a non-cloud facing environment. So the architecture that was in place not only to move our data to the cloud, but to have the forward-facing SASE would be an example, secure access security edge, to be able to provide security controls for your data that you moved into the cloud. Next slide, please. From a sustainability standpoint, I often say that as we build out security programs, security is simple, but it's certainly not easy. And at the end of the day, we answer 3 primary questions. What do I have? From an infrastructure standpoint, what is the technology stack that I have? From a licensing standpoint, what am I able to do with that licensing? Am I using it appropriately? Have I overspent? Have I underspent? Do I have the ability to leverage licensing of current technologies? Configuration. From a configuration standpoint, am I getting the most out of that technology? I like to call this tool optimization and tool rationalization. Am I getting the most out of the taxpayer funds that I've spent to ensure that I'm not buying 2 new technologies when the technologies I have in place, properly configured, could cover those gaps? Are the configurations that I have creating unnecessary gaps in complexity? We saw earlier with the amount of technologies that are brought to bear in a typical security organization, the overlap and gaps could be worse than leaving the gaps unaddressed. And finally, the cost. So how am I protecting my environment? We spoke earlier about some of the frameworks that are in place, and that varies state to state, although there are certainly some federal requirements. Do I have a framework in place? Do I have a state set of security controls? Some states, for example, will tie state funding to compliance from a security standpoint to individual agencies. Does my policy reflect that framework? Does it flow down naturally? So from your framework, you build out your policies. From those policies, you build your controls, which will enforce those policies. And finally, do I have the technology to ensure that those controls are in place and that they're being appropriately enforced? And finally, how am I doing? From a legislative and compliance standpoint, are there legislative or compliance drivers? That could be everything from HIPAA to PCI to requirements from the legislature. Am I doing assessments? Are these internal, external? Do I have programmatic programs like state audits? Do I have external penetration tests? We talked earlier, one of the speakers spoke earlier about using volunteer forces. And then finally, what is the tempo of those environments, of those scans rather? So at the end of the day, do I have the ability to bring technology to bear, which will tell me at a very quick look, for example, we're building programs now, security programs utilizing technology, which would allow at the top level, whether that would be at the state CIO level or a quick view for the legislature, how individual agencies are doing as far as phishing campaigns, and that can be a graded scale or that could be as simple as green, yellow, red. Are individual agencies doing well in their phishing campaigns? That is a quick hit that we're seeing in some state agencies and some state governments. Does the legislature at any given point have the ability to look across the organizations and across the state agencies and see how they're doing with, for example, one of the things we identified as a prime threat, phishing maturity across state agencies. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. I think a lot of the points have been hit today repeatedly from multiple angles by multiple organizations. But again, I thank you for the time to speak to the committee today.
Well, Mark, thank you for being here. I actually have a few comments thoughts or even questions. If we can go back a couple slides, let me see. Yeah, sustainability is fine. So I think we all know that state government is complex, many times archaic, inefficient, and having many years ago worked in state government, a lot of times if we have a problem, we just try and patch it up or add another system or do something to kind of get by because of cost constraints or politics or you name the scenario. I guess more of a comment. It seems like at times, and I know way back when, and I know the folks at GTA know this, I interned and worked at GTA when it was created. You feel sorry for me later. No offense, GTA. One of my first jobs, out of college, and I remember way back when, we would go through and we would actually do strategic planning for every agency in the state, go through an IT strategic plan, my first exposure to strategic planning. We would do assessments, we would do everything else. And I know if we fast forward to today, how much of that is going on. I'm sure there's an element of it. But when we talk about framework, policy, controls, technology, the consistency across all agencies, that even I think GTA may service, may not service, and I believe, and somebody in the room will correct me if I'm wrong, there's also a level of maybe not consistency or framework in place or infrastructure, even when we get down to the different constitutional officers in terms of how they're operated, how they're set up, how they deploy technology, or most importantly, how do they deal with cyber, and so I'm assuming at some level there's a jigsaw puzzle at some level where maybe it's not totally the same. And I'm not saying that's the best answer, but I'm saying it's just adding to the government complexity as we solve this problem. And when we think about what does that impact on GBI or GEMA or DOD, or we just go down the line, especially when we're talking about actors in Georgia we're trying to go after. Can you talk about just briefly, having such a complex system, how do you truly have sustainability, and then us as legislators really make kind of a policy case to say, hey, appropriators, governor, we need X dollars to solve a problem. If we can't truly demonstrate sustainability, and I think for the taxpayer, transparent outcomes. What's your thoughts about that?
Oh, thank you, Senator. We see that often, and it really becomes a balance between centralized control, which would allow that, and the decision-making at the lowest possible level. That centralization, as much as it can be possible, typically happens if you can kind of do the 80-20 rule, where there can be a standard from the state level and individual agencies can then buy off on that. That gets you a long way. Understanding that there will be exceptions, and those exceptions are documented, you end up with a fairly homogeneous environment for the vast majority. So regardless of individual functions, I know while each agency may well have applications that are very specific to their role, the average desktop user, for example, for this state or any state is going to generally use very, very similar tools. So I've seen in Texas, for example, Colorado and Indiana, all that I've worked with, have been very successful in really using something like the GTA as a purchasing vehicle. And so there are two ways to handle that. One I've seen has been more legislative, which I'll tongue-in-cheek called stick, and that's really driving them to an outcome. And I think the other is more carrot, where you'll work with an agency and be able to provide discounts or services, as I was able to hear the CIO and the CISO talk about the services which is a beautiful model to allow agencies to sign on for them. Did I answer your question, sir?
Thank you. Yes, Mark. Senator Albers.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mark, thank you. Appreciate your presentation, and I'm going to shift slightly because I think you'll be uniquely positioned to answer this. What we haven't really talked about today is business continuity. 20 years ago, business continuity was prevention from a terrorist attack. Then it shifted to more weather-related events. Now it's almost exclusively all about cybersecurity. It's terrible when something happens like a colonial pipeline. The tragedy is when you don't have a system that has the proper backup and restoration process or continuity in place in order to recover from that. So I'm curious as to your thoughts, personally as well as from SHI, on what you see from both the government level, but even that to critical business level of who's investing and really leveraging keeping the enterprise alive in case of an attack.
No, that's a great question. And we see that quite a bit now. As things moved to the cloud, it really took away some of the hardware concerns. As a Texan, it was interesting when we built our state recovery center in San Angelo, Texas, which both floods and tornadoes routinely. But moving to the cloud, you remove some of that. And so it becomes less of that issue. The challenge now, I think, as you pointed out, is more around resiliency of the data and the ability to access that data. Ransomware has really brought that to light, that no longer is it an issue of that data disappearing, it's the difference. We talk about in security about the CIA triad, the confidentiality of data, the integrity of data, and the availability of data, where before the confidentiality was really a concern. Would people get to this data? Now, frankly, it's the integrity when this is encrypted by ransomware, which, although that data is now available, it's not available in any sort of usable format. So that would be a great example of that. I think a lot of that is answered by the cloud, and there's no shortcut to having business continuity and disaster recovery plans. As I heard the state CISO speak earlier, Mr. Allen, there's a great deal of work being done here in making these real exercises, even bringing together some of the Air Force units. I think that's tremendous. Rather than being a paper exercise, this is now actually being tested in a real world scenario.
That's cool. Thank you. Comments? Mark, thank you for being here. So that brings us. So that brings us to the end, and thank you to all the presenters and attendees and everybody who was able to join us here today at Georgia Tech. I just have some brief closing comments, and I'll see if my colleagues have anything they want to share. We are working on the next meeting. It will probably be in early to mid-October. We will have that notice out soon. Likely it will be in Augusta, Georgia. Senator Jones and I are coordinating on when the next meeting will take place. I think the next meeting we will probably have some discussion on cyber as it relates to the impacts on healthcare. I think we will have some discussion potentially as it relates to the workforce conversation we had today and kind of fleshing that out, I think, a little bit more in terms of what does that really mean across the state with all of our partners, private sector, public sector, university, K-12. And then I think what I would like to see us do as we move the discussion is to a solution-based problem solving and what are we going to drive out of this committee as we go forward. But I'll turn to Senator Redd, see if you have any closing remarks before we leave. Any parting thoughts?
Great conversation. I think, as usual, no matter what you do in terms of technology, you always have to take into consideration the human factor, and that consistent training and preparing them to let them know how they're a vital cog in this is very important, and I think we saw that today.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Albers.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for initiating the study committee. And I know that typically we start, building the report and the output from these, and what happens is we get to the third meeting, we forget sometimes what happened in the first meeting. So for us recording this, as well as maybe our Senate research team, we might be starting to compile the report. I came up with just a kind of a top 10 list, and the first one is education. How do we continue to get kids excited from K to 12 to start? Then our technical college and university system, as well as your certificates. The second one is, again, more offensive tactics. And I'm going to use the example again when after 9/11 with terrorists, when we were going after them all the time and they were running for their lives, they could commit a lot less terrorist attacks. And I think it's time that as a nation, we go on the offensive and working with our partners internationally to go after these folks so they are on the run. Third one, we mentioned RICO. We need to start bringing many more RICO cases against not just the individuals, but the groups that are supporting those. Fourth is training. Fifth is risk mitigation. Sixth is how we support small and medium businesses. The seventh is how do we support individuals and families. The eighth, obviously, we talked about the cyber response volunteer team. I asked you, Mr. Chairman, maybe we could hear even virtually from one of those other states for them to explain how that's been operating there. Ninth is state resources that we need to combat this. And last but not least, number 10 is business continuity. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly look forward to having persons come to Augusta, home of Georgia Cyber Center. But, one of the things that came out about this as a former prosecutor is that, cyber crime is no different than any other type of crime that exists out there. And it is really the new armed robberies and things of that nature. And we have to make sure that we're able to protect our citizens. And also in those situations that they are victims of that we can actually solve these crimes as much as possible. And when it comes to punishment, treat the punishment just as you would do any other type of robbery type case. It's very important that we take this seriously. And obviously this has done that, and we'll continue to move forward. Thank you.
Well, with that, we are adjourned. I'll take a motion to close.
Adjourn.
All those in favor? Thank you for coming to Georgia Tech. Go Jackets.